It's 6 o'clock. We would like to start right on time. So we'll convene meeting, and could we all stand for a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments. Members of the public are invited to address the authority regarding any item that is not listed on the agenda. Please complete one of the speaker cards in advance of the meeting and hand it to a member of the staff. All right. Consent calendar.
Move approval.
I have a first.
About 3 seconds over here.
And I have a second. Did you get him? Got him? Call for the vote. Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Moving into regular agenda items, staff has requested that I take 2.2 first, and then we will follow by 2.1. Analysis results from the initial draft transportation expenditure performance assessment. Martin.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Commissioners. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at CCTA. And I'm here to update you on our analysis of the proposed 2020 TEP. The planning section has been busy working with our consultant, Kittleson and Associates, running the model and trying to analyze the impacts of the TEP in the future. So our basic objective is to look at the projects in the TEP and figure out what they do to the system today and what they do to the system in the future. And there are a lot of steps involved to get to the place that we're at tonight. And I think I told you earlier that there's no turning back. Once you set certain things, make certain decisions, there's a long lead time to doing this analysis. So this shows you all the things we've done since we last saw the draft TEP back in June and started working off of that. So we identified the scenarios, which means we have to decide, what year are we going to model and what build and no build scenarios we're going to do. We have a toolbox. We selected tools from that. So we decided to use the countywide model, our travel demand forecasting model, and a pedestrian bicycle model that is a post-processing tool that was developed through MTC and ABAG and through our consultant, Fair and Peers, on the bicycle plan. We selected performance measures, what metrics will be used to evaluate the TEP, and we're kind of in the midst of that. We have now kind of more technical than colloquial measures, but we want to eventually get to outcome-based measures that kind of tell a story. We have to go through and say, okay, what projects are out there today? What projects are going to be built if we don't have a TEP, and what projects will be built if we do have a TEP? And then of those, which can we model? Because all projects aren't modelable. A lot of work to code the projects, including transit projects, into the network of the model. And we have to run the model. Review the outputs, refine the outputs, and right now we're in the process of doing what's called post-processing, refining the output analysis and using techniques to determine some of the multimodal impacts that are more difficult to get from the tools that we have. So the countywide model, you own it and operate it. It runs on the Transcad software. And it's required under Measure J as part of the Expenditure Plan and Growth Management Program that you have and maintain a comprehensive countywide transportation model. And as the designated congestion management agency for Contra Costa, you're required to maintain and regularly update the model and keep it consistent with the model and databases that MTC and ABAG have. So our tool, our travel forecasting model, has 3,120 zones. We start with MTC's model, which is for the whole Bay Area, close to 1,500 zones. And then we add a couple of thousand zones for Contra Costa. As I said, we use the Transcat software. Covers the 9-county Bay Area, so it's actually got Caltrain on it. It's got the Caltrain stops. It's got VTA light rail on it. It covers the whole 9-county Bay Area. It's multimodal, and it's consistent with MTC ABAG. It is still what we call a 4-step trip-based model. We're transitioning to an activity-based model, but we're kind of in a holding pattern for the time being, waiting until MTC gets their activity-based model ready and ready for prime time. So let me tell you about the scenarios we selected, and we gave you a memo on this earlier, and you agreed to these scenarios. I hope you still agree to them. So first of all, existing conditions. We did say, okay, let's look at 2020. What's the world like? What's the world going to be like in March 2020 when voters go to the ballot and pull the lever on the measure? And for this, we included projects that are under construction by 2020. So we kind of wanted to have a scenario where we didn't have hanging threads of, for example, the southbound HOV lanes on 680. The managed lanes there, that's going to go through the 24 interchange. It's under construction. It's going to be open soon. Let's put it in. Phase 3 of Route 4, for example, under construction. Let's assume it's completed. So that gives us a solid baseline for 2020. And then just for fun, we drop the entire TEP on top of that. What would happen if everything we're planning for the year 2040 were built today? And what are the impacts of all of those projects and programs on today's transportation system? So that's going to be an interesting scenario, and the reason I say future tense is because that one is not ready yet for tonight. But we do have the future models ready. We did what's called a no-build. What would happen if the TEP was not approved by the voters? We'd have 2020 existing conditions plus the projects that are in the 2017 Regional Transportation Plan, which is a financially constrained plan. Some of those projects have had cost increases and would not be fundable without the TEP, so we pull those out, and we essentially can look at what would happen if we only had continued STIP dollars, RM3, SB1, and so forth out into the future with no new sales tax measures. We do, however, assume an extension of Measure J from 2034 to 2040. That's pretty much in all of our assumptions and in MTC's assumptions. So then we get to the TEP build, and so we take the 2040 no build and we add all of the TEP projects. And to just give you an idea of what these what the projects are like, we have on the wall maps that you can look at and chat about afterwards if you're interested in seeing these more closely. But essentially, here's existing conditions with the phase 3 of 684 and the southbound managed lanes. Here's the no build, and you can see there's a lot of projects that are in the RTP for 2020. And so we get things like phase 1 and 2 of 684. We get some non-WIDA ferry service. We get a lot of widening projects. And then we go to the TEP. The TEP projects are in blue. You can see there's a lot of projects, including the airport connector over on the east side, which is a major improvement to the Byron-Vasco connector. And we're able to complete the 684 interchange. We're able to punch through on northbound 680 to get a continuous northbound managed lane through the 24 interchange. And we have get to full WIDA service at most of the ferry terminals, and various transit improvements, including the extension of EBART from Antioch to Brentwood, or some kind of transit improvement there. So this is kind of complicated, and there are a lot of boxes here. We can talk about it, looking at the drawings if you'd like, and we can go into this further detail if you'd like. So let's get to the initial results. So tonight I'm just going to show you kind of which way the arrow is going, whether it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction. We're not going to present you with actual numbers. The numbers are coming, but they're still moving around a little bit. So some of these, it's good if it goes down, and it's good if it goes up. So these are all green. VMT per capita is headed down. Daily vehicle hours of travel down. A big drop in vehicle hours of delay. Average speeds are going up with the TEP. This is a comparison of the build to the no build in 2040. CO2 emissions drop with the TEP. CO2 per capita goes down. The percentage share of drive alone drops. Shared ride increases. Transit ridership increases. We're seeing significant increases in bicycle usage. And walking is pretty much constant. I think that's more a reflection on the model than anything else. That's what's the model's not that good at picking up walking trips, so those are essentially staying constant. So that's where we are. Things are looking good. We're on track to meet the goals that are in our 2017 CTP. We're on track to meet the goals that we've set in the TEP. And so there's more work to do. We're going to check and refine the modeling results. We have a number of post-processing tools that we're working with to refine the outputs, especially the bicycle and the walking outputs. We want to continue working on these outcome-based metrics, which say, okay, you know, a trip from A to B, from point A to B, how much time will you save? We were thinking it'd be really cool if we could say, you know, take a day of vacation on us because everybody saves a day of travel time or a day sitting in traffic delay for a year, and then we'll report all of this out, hopefully by early September. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Just a comment. First of all, Martin, thank you for this. I think we're all waiting to see those details. But I also want to commend you that it's very transparent. In fact, I think it needs to be highlighted, detailed for the list. When you mentioned all the projects that you're assuming they'll be completed, whether they are or they aren't, but they're underway, that's a really valid way to start. Because if you held those off, it'd make this outcome look better. And that's not really fair because it's really in the Measure J process. But I think it's really important that on any document produced, list what every one of those projects are and make sure it's clearly shown as a footnote that these projects are in the base as opposed to being counted into the future, because it just adds to the validity of what's being done. Otherwise, I think this is great. We'd like to see the details of this as it comes forward, but I know how much work this is, and just want to say really thank you for that.
Any other comments? Do we do public comments? Is anyone from the public wishing to address us on this issue? Seeing no one, we will ask for action. Just a report?
Right?
It says action. Okay. All right. We will now move in to 2.2.
We just did that.
Or excuse me, 2.1. That's what you get when you skip. And staff has asked a request that we let staff go through the entire topic before the board gets involved and other persons. So we could we'll give you our undivided attention, sir, through the entire presentation. And then
Okay, go ahead.
And then the public will also have a chance to chat with us too.
Well, thank you. I have a lot of experience in my professional or my working career giving presentations, and we were making revisions up until the night before. I think this is the first time we were making revisions until 20 minutes before. So I'm not even sure all the slides are in the order that I hope they're in. So please forgive me if we have hit a few glitches, and I think we're going to try and get copies of the presentation to you, but it's printing now. So if you remember last week, the authority members were moving towards approving the TEP tonight and then going out to the cities. And at the same time, they were generating significant objections from a number of the stakeholder groups because of the contents of portions of the TEP. I mean, they told us they liked a lot of it, but they still had some significant reservations. So during the past week, there have been a lot of discussions, and you saw those reflected in the email you received from Mr. Iwasaki yesterday. And there have also been a lot of conversations with staff, with some commissioners, and also with members of the coalition group, as well as many of the other stakeholders who are involved. So I get the pleasure of presenting the results of all that work. As I said, my version was printed at 6:05, so you're close to me. And what we'd like to do, or I'd like to do, is really start with what we think are the most significant proposed revisions and then sort of work our way down. And as the chair said, what we suggest is that we present the entire package, because to the extent that the coalition members and others are going to get up later tonight and say that they support this, it is to a large extent as a package, not as a series of components. So if you take out one component, they may ask for something else, or to some extent they may withdraw their support. So what I'm hoping is that we'll first understand what the package is. We would then suggest that we will take questions from authority members. You will hear comments from the public, deliberate and provide us with direction. Our recommendation at the end of all that, based on what we know so far, is that you would approve the TEP and direct us to make minor clarifying and grammatical correction changes that change neither the meaning nor the intent. There is a lot of material here. I'm deliberately going to go slowly. And what I suggest you do is hopefully you have copies of your August 14th version of the TEP with you. Who does not? Okay, well, we need to print more copies of that. Okay, well, I'm impressed. Okay. All right. Would anyone like a copy of the August 14th version? Okay, seeing. Okay, Monica? Anyone else? August 14th. I think. 16th. Oh, August 16th, excuse me. I don't know that. Okay, so.
The one that was circulated on Friday.
Okay, all right, why don't we print enough? And while you wait for that, I'll just proceed slowly. So what I want to first talk about are 5 major categories of discussion that we have had with coalition members, in particular, plus some others, during the past week. We'll then talk about some of the August 14th revisions that you approved that weren't already covered in the first discussion on major categories. And then we received some other suggestions for miscellaneous edits. And if we get to that far, then I think that those will be relatively smooth sailing. So within the 5 categories of discussion, the order in which I'd like to go through them is as follows. First, we're going to talk about the proposal to make this a 35-year measure. Second, talk about some comments about the roles, responsibilities, and composition of the Public Oversight Committee, amendments to the growth management element, amendments to where we talk about vehicle miles traveled, particularly the proposed VMT bank, and finally some comments about how we could better incorporate social equity into the description of the measure. So let's start with in that order. So we've put together a proposed 35-year measure. And what I want to focus on here is what happens, in a sense, to the $546 million in current dollars, that in 2020 dollars, that's generated by going from 30 years to 35 years. And the proposal in front of you is that we would keep modernize local roads and improve access to jobs and housing, or return to source as it is, at 17.4%. Over another 5 years, that would use $96 million. We also maintain the money that goes to affordable or accessible transportation for seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities, safe transportation for youth and students, reduce and reverse commutes, transportation planning and services and facilities, and administration. And those would all continue at their average percentage rate of the first 30 years. So in total, that comes to $169 million. That leaves $377 million. And this proposal talks about putting 70% of that into transit services, and that could mean transit operations. It could mean additional money for transit capital, for example, whether that be routed through cities to provide better signalization to facilitate transit vehicles, or for other things. And then the other 30% would go to the category we already have of improved traffic flow on major roads. So that gets you back to the $546 million. The next thing to look at is give Hasham credit for this. Oh, excuse me, Hasham credit for all of these. This one talks about how that improved traffic flow on major roads and provide convenient and reliable transit service would be allocated by region. And it's using the same population breakouts, I assume, that we've used in the first 30 years. So, for example, East County goes from 75 to 107 million. San Ramon Valley goes from 19 to 31. West County goes from 10 to 38. And then it also talks about how the transit dollars would be allocated. Central County goes from 78 to 162. Southwest from 78 to 120, East County from 36 to 110, and West County from 187 to 250. And then the other categories really these are the percentages that we had on the top of the chart in the prior slide. So you've got return to source equivalent going up by 96, affordable transport for seniors and people with disabilities by 26, safe transportation for youth and students by 17, et cetera. So that is a proposal for how you would allocate the extra money from an additional 5 years. And you recall that members from the coalition have come to us in prior meetings and consistently said that they felt that the measure, while it had many good components, was not allocating sufficient funds to transit, be it transit operations, transit capital, whatever, and that if we were to make this more of a transformative measure, they wanted to see more money allocated to that category. So that's really what was the driving thought behind this. All right, so that's that one. And really the descriptions of the expenditure categories don't change. The numbers do, and the duration does. So let's now move on to the Public Oversight Committee. You recall at the last meeting that you agreed to add members representing 4 categories to the Public Oversight Committee, and the county representation would decrease from 4 to 1. So we went from a committee of 16 to a committee of 17. So this slide essentially captures that. It talks about supervisors will nominate 1 member to represent the county, and then you have 12 members from different groups. In Measure X, we had named a number of those groups. So, for example, League of Women Voters, Contra Costa Taxpayers Association, East Bay Leadership Council, Building and Construction Trade, Central Labor Council, Paratransit Coordinating Committee, and Bike East Bay. In this sense, for the new 4 categories, transit, low income, climate change, and seniors and environmental or open space organizations that you agreed to, we didn't mention specific entities that would nominate those members. Because we, in Measure X, did and carried that language forward, you can imagine that has become somewhat of a bone of discussion. There are people, members of the coalition, who would like to see specific organizations mentioned as either being the provider of the nominee, or one or two organizations that would provide the nominee. Or the other option is to just take the other groups we've had listed there and talk about them in terms of categories as opposed to mentioning specific groups. So you didn't mention no specific groups. There's a concern that it isn't, we're not treating the two categories in exactly the same way. Right. So our recommendation for language, if you look at the bottom of this slide, is on page 41 to say the authority will consult with interest groups to solicit, identify nominees, and nominate Public Oversight Committee members that represent the areas listed above. And we've received a recommendation from the coalition, if I can find the right place, saying that, for example, the transit person would be nominated by Transform or its successor. The low-income person would be nominated by Monument Impact and Urban Habitat or their successors. And the seniors would be nominated by Rehabilitative Services or their designated partner. And there were no recommendations from the coalition for who would nominate people in the environmental and climate change categories. So that's that point. The other thing that we wanted to emphasize is in the in the composition is just to make it clear that all members are selected by the authority. You know, a nomination from an organization is simply that. The authority can say no for reasons, you know, that you want. And then also on page 40, we wanted to make it clear that one of the roles of the Public Oversight Committee is to provide input and recommendations for the development of all the guidelines that we talk about in this plan for performance-based projects, things like that. So you're not, so that make it clear to the committee that you're expecting them to make recommendations. Whether you follow them or not is a decision for the authority. All right. The other question that came up a bit last week and we didn't resolve, and has come up more in the subsequent conversations, is so you get 17 people together of different backgrounds and skills, and the authority really wants them to be a cohesive, functioning entity that helps the authority become more successful. So a proposal in that regard is that the authority would provide resources for meeting design and process, facilitation, skill and knowledge building in order to foster and support the committee's ability to provide meaningful input and recommendations to you. We have not established a budget yet. You would have to establish a budget. They would have to come up with a proposal. We also wanted to make it clear that the POC, through their chair, could inform the authority board chair and executive director of any concerns they have regarding authority staff's commitment or performance regarding open communication, the timely sharing of information, and teamwork. All of those are things that staff would expect to do well consistently. So I would hope that the authority chair would never have, the POC chair would never have to make that call. Because staff should be doing things like communicating openly, timely sharing information, and being team players. We had put in prior versions that the POC shall not receive monetary compensation, and now on page 41, except for reimbursement of travel or other incidental expenses in a manner consistent with other authority advisory committees. We've received some feedback that, we received some feedback that participation in the committee may be a barrier, may be difficult for some people with lower means. So we've suggested the additional sentence to say exceptions may be made by the authority to reasonably assist low-income community members to participate in the POC meetings. And we'd like to strike out the words overcome barriers. This is what happens when you don't get to proofread the final time. So again, it's the authority would have to make the exception. It is designated to participate in POC meetings as opposed to a more generalized form of exception. Oops. Okay, in the last meeting, we talked about extending the review period for expenditure plan amendments of greater than 50 million to have additional steps, which I'll cover on the next page. We received a lot of feedback from the coalition that they were concerned that the authority would approve these on a 6-5 vote. I don't recall too many 6-5 votes in my time on the authority, but they requested a supermajority. So we're recommending that there be a supermajority of 2/3, which, by the way, equals 7 members instead of 6. So it's one more, and you can all reference back to how often we've had 7-4 votes, where that would be the determining supermajority. You had already discussed these amendments in the prior meeting, so that there'd be a regularly scheduled public meeting. These were actually amendments that were proposed by interested parties outside the coalition, and they were you indicated support at the last meeting, so I won't go through those again. Moving on. Okay, so on page 50, under the development of guidelines, there was a list of guidelines that would be developed where the Public Oversight Committee would have some involvement. Why don't we take a break and we'll pass out. I think we have both slides and, okay, and this is the August 16th version. All right, so if you go to page 50 of this, you will see that in the bottom right, under guideline 43, there is a list of scope for guideline development. And the request is that we add to that the integrated transit plan and the vehicles miles, or the VMT mitigation program. Both of those plans or programs are already in the TEP elsewhere, so we're not adding things we're not already developing. It's just now making sure that it goes through this more public process, as opposed to, for example, in the integrated transit plan, have the transit operators sit together to develop it. And then if you go to page 51, there it, oops. Okay. Under it talks about section 4, the POC will provide input and any recommendations to the guidelines for consideration by the authority. So here it says provide input and recommendations. So he struck any. Why I don't know. All right. And then there's also been a request that we extend the public review period to 45 days from 30. These guidelines will not be developed overnight regardless. And then on number 5, make it clear that when it comes back to the authority, you'll discuss the POC recommendations any public comments you get, and that the supermajority be applied to the approval of guidelines. So again, it's 7 votes. All right, so now we're going to move to elements of the growth management plan. And I'm going to ask you to turn back to page 30. Oops. Yeah. And if you look at number 3, there's a series of address housing options. All right. And then there's a recommendation that we add some language to the bottom. So the first is that each jurisdiction shall demonstrate meaningful progress in preserving existing affordable units for low-income residents by adopting and implementing locally appropriate anti-displacement and affordable housing policies to support community stabilization. So what is locally appropriate in one jurisdiction may not be what is locally appropriate in another. So this provides flexibility for each jurisdiction to do what they believe is locally appropriate. There's also a request that the jurisdiction adopt a resolution affirming that they are complying with the Surplus Land Act, to which you're all obligated to do anyway, and clarifying that your disposition processes. In addition, you'll develop and maintain a publicly available inventory of public land. My recollection from serving on the city council is you have to do that anyway, at least cities. I don't know about the county. Okay, so, you know, and then you'll provide a report on what you do for tenant protection and the production and preservation of affordable units. If you then go to page 44, and under guideline 16, which starts at the bottom right of page 44 and continues on to page 45, we had listed in prior versions a number of essentially factors that we would consider, performance factors that we would consider, and those are listed towards the top. There is a request to consider the impact on displacement and affordable housing as a performance factor. We suggest that we move that into the sentence which says the authority may require the evaluation of other performance criteria, for example, this depending on the specific need and purpose of the project. So it's included as an example. It would be involved when the project had that kind of an impact. And if it didn't, then it wouldn't need to be. So this is calling out something that could have occurred anyway. Vehicle mile travel comments. So let's go back to page 35. We had the choice of taking you through it page by page and changing subjects, or taking you through a subject and changing page by page. I think this works a little better, but both are difficult. Okay. We've all agreed that one of our goals is to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita. We had not previously applied that to the integrated transit plan, which is one of the things that the transit operators need in order to get money from this. So we've put language into that effect that they shall demonstrate reduction in vehicle miles traveled per capita and greenhouse gas emissions to help meet our countywide goals. And then transit service investments, capital projects, assets, and transit priority measures to be funded from the measure shall reduce VMT or GHG or participate in the VMT mitigation program. So essentially it's treating transit funding the same way that we treat project funding. Now, it may be difficult to envision a transit initiative that doesn't reduce GMG and VMT, so one would hope this is a null set. However, if they come up with something that does, then they're going to have to participate in the VMT program just as anyone else would. Okay. We're going to now move a few pages further onto page 39. And here, the overall topic is about the Advanced Mitigation Program, or the VMT component. And these are modifications to the last paragraph, which is what talks about the VMT component. And this would begin about midway down in your text document. It says, as a result, projects will be expected to demonstrate. And here we want to insert the words, a reduction in VMT to meet the authority's goal to reduce VMT per capita and GHG emissions countywide. And then at the bottom, add a sentence which says, the VMT mitigation program will consider the structure of the program, legal framework to comply with CEQA and the Mitigation Fee Act, it's a mitigation fee, and program design such as project selection and prioritization, measurement, evaluation, verification, reporting, equity, and monitoring. And the amount of the VMT mitigated will be for the planning horizon for each project. And my immediate question was, so how do you define a planning horizon? And the answer is it depends on the project. It sounds like for freeway projects, it's 20 to 40 years, 20 years. And for local projects, it may be 5 to 10. Right, or whatever the jurisdiction sets. But there would be a planning horizon that your engineers would define at the beginning. But I now ask you to move forward to page 44. And again, now we're back to our guideline 16. This is actually probably going to be on page 45 somewhere. Oh, end of the first paragraph. Okay. There's an existing sentence you'll see at the top of page 45, the last sentence of the first paragraph, that says the authority may require the evaluation of other performance criteria dependent upon the specific need and purpose of the project. And then we would add a sentence that says the authority will perform review and independent verification of performance-based reviews submitted by project sponsors. So all that means is if it's an authority project, the authority is going to be doing the review. In some cases, the project sponsor may ask us to do the review, but in some cases, the project sponsor will wish to do the review themselves, in which case the authority will review their assessment and provide that information back to the authority and the Public Oversight Committee. We would hope that the authority's assessment would be consistent with what the project sponsor comes up with. All right, further on page 44, now into the second sentence. Let's see. Yeah, midway in the paragraph begins, from the top of page 45, the authority is committed to meet the governor's executive order B16, 2012. And let's see, exceptions. Okay. So about 1, 2, 3, 4, about the 9th line, there's a sentence that begins, limited exceptions will be identified in a process created to select a project. So we've already agreed that there could be a limited number of exceptions, such as safety, that would allow a project to not decrease VMT and GHG. I think we had previously said that increases VMT and GHG, we've been asked to call it does not decrease. Okay. So we put that in a couple times. And then at the bottom it says funding for projects that do not decrease VMT and GHG sufficiently will not be allocated until the authority develops this mitigation plan. And that will define the limited exceptions, substantial benefits of the plan, the process to determine adequate findings for these exceptions. And the purpose of the VMT mitigation program will be to fund projects and programs that reduce VMT, GHG emissions, and traffic congestions in the county. And I personally would add that are in relative proximity to where the project occurs. So you don't want to have a project that increases VMT in Richmond and have all the mitigation occur in San Ramon, or vice versa. All right. The fifth of the major categories was what we'll call social equity. And you may recall that our last meeting, representative from Greenbelt Alliance got up and read to us statements that are in our countywide transportation plan that talk about social equity. So this is largely an effort to convey those same sentiments in the TEP. So now we're going to go all the way back to page 3. And in the last paragraph, we'd like to revise that as follows. Continue to say this TEP is intentionally designed to be equitable across the entire county based on population. And as we've done in the countywide transportation plan, commit that the TEP will deliver proportionally greater benefits to communities of concerns as defined by MTC, as opposed to, let's say, the Air Resources Board definition, and low-income residents. And right. You now move on to page 12. In terms of achieving intended outcomes, which begins on the left-hand side, there's a suggestion to add a new paragraph, which actually appears in the third paragraph of this August 16th version, where it says the CCTA will ensure funding in the TEP will achieve the outcomes identified in the 2017 Countywide Transportation Plan to the extent it includes the same projects. The TEP offers equitable transportation opportunities for all residents. In evaluating detailed funding proposals, the authority will assure that expenditures benefit those living in communities of concern and for minority and low-income residents. Further on page 12, under taxpayer safeguards, which appears in the right-hand column, there is a fourth bullet. Add a phrase which says, while ensuring a greater proportion of benefits to communities of concern and low-income residents. So I would say that most of us who sit on transit operator boards know that their patrons tend to come disproportionately from low-income communities. So while that might not make the entire TEP provide a greater proportion of benefits to communities of concern and low-income residents, it certainly starts the process. And then if you have equitable distribution of all the other programs, you essentially met this goal. Now we move forward to page, so I think that was the last of the 5 major, oh, I do? Oh, right, I do, okay, sorry. Now move on to page 36. We have a few more on this topic. So on the transit policy, there's a request to add, and it's in this, part of it is in this version. Paragraph 10 in the bottom right, which would now say all transit operators that receive funding from this TEP shall report on how received funding benefits communities of concern and low-income residents in their jurisdictions and service areas. The integrated transit plan should ensure proportionally greater benefits to communities of concern and low-income residents. The transit operators are probably here and can comment on that. And then moving on to page 44, we have item 13 talks about geographic equity, and the request is to make this geographic and social equity and add a new sentence at the bottom which says CCTA will commit that the TEP will deliver proportionally greater benefits to communities of concern and low-income residents. So this is sort of a theme repeated in several places. All right. We now come down to a series of miscellaneous revisions that were not related to the 5 major categories we just went through. So back to page 3. So I think this is the page we're taking out. So this, right. On the 14th, you essentially approved this language. We suggest you delete it in favor of the language we previously provided for page 3, which is shorter, by the way. And then the next one is page 12, where we talk about commitment to performance. So starting with the second sentence, which appears on line 5, we'll add the comments that the guidelines will be developed through meaningful community engagement and engagement with cities, towns, Contra Costa County, RTPCs, and Public Oversight Committee to establish the performance criteria for evaluation of programs identified in the policy statements. And then we strike out the middle sentence, which included only some of those groups. And then at the bottom, we state what we've said elsewhere, was that CCTA commits to a goal to accelerate zero-emission vehicle penetration and a 15% reduction in vehicle miles traveled per capita. Moving on to the, page is that? Let's see, page 26. I'm sorry we've got things running into each other. So if you go to the reduce and reverse commutes category, which is on the right-hand column, this is the same change as last week. We agreed to take out the words that reference promoting housing within planned or established centers that are supported by transit, and really focus on transportation programs and projects funded out of this category will support economic development and job creation in Contra Costa County. So this is reiterating what you requested us to do. Staying on that page, we're adding some revisions to the first paragraph where it says, now if people live closer to their jobs, they have less need to commute long distances, by saying if people live closer to their jobs in transit, they have less need to commute long distances. Staying with this category on page 26, now it's in the second paragraph in the last sentence. Excuse me. Right, second, okay. As examples of this project that could be funded include new or upgraded rail crossings to unlock development potential, and for employment centers, rail-based goods, et cetera. And the change is that you'd say on routes from transit stations to and/or housing to employment centers, as opposed to just from transit stations to employment centers. So if you could help people get from housing to employment centers, that's also considered good. But the employment centers is always a required component of funding in this category. Moving on to page 34. In the last week's meeting, we added a third category for conditions of compliance for a small or a minor change in the ULL. So remember, the two we already have include if a jurisdiction submits an annexation request of greater than 30 acres without having a ULL go out that far, they're out of compliance, that they have to have a ULL in place. And we raised the possibility at the last meeting that you could have a third party submit the ULL request, and we proposed two conditions that would cause the jurisdiction to be out of compliance, and those are that the jurisdiction submits a will serve letter to LAFCO, and we're just defining will serve letter after consultation with LAFCO staff as something that determines the applicant's ability, and in this case, it has to be the jurisdiction's ability and willingness to serve the subject area in any further development, and then they utilize an existing applicable tax sharing agreement and or enter into a new one. And again, the whole purpose of this is to avoid a situation where a third party submits the annexation request as opposed to the jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction just goes along. Because one of the things LAFCO will require to approve an annexation request is a will serve letter and a tax sharing agreement. Now, the jurisdiction always has the opportunity to expand the urban limit line, in which case these provisions no longer apply. In terms of flipping a little bit ahead to page 36, we said that the authority will not fund construction of any transit capital project until funding is identified to operate the improvement, and we got some comments to that, and so we've now said that we will not fund construction of any transit capital improvement until the project sponsor demonstrates how the project would increase ridership, and then in parentheses, or contributes to the authority's VMT per capita and GHG emission countywide goals. Then funding for planning and design, including demonstration projects, are not subject to this requirement. And the reason to include the bolded language is that we still don't want transit projects that don't increase ridership and that don't commit to our overall goals. Now, some of the transit operators have commented negatively about the VMT per capita items, arguing that, for example, if they use this money to electrify their fleets, that would help achieve GHG goals, but might not do much for VMT. A response would be that what the voters have told us is their overriding consideration is reducing congestion and saving time, which is why we've left in increasing ridership and left it to you to decide whether you want to also include the or clauses, or at least the GHG or clause. Moving ahead to page 44, we recall that we had talked about every recipient receiving $10 million or more from the TEP report on how their funding benefited communities of concerns. We've deleted that per the request of the authority. Yes.
So I just want to add that the way we're actually capturing that based on the discussion from last week is that there's 3 areas that we're capturing reporting on communities of concern in low-income residents. One is, you already seen the new addition to the transit policy for the transit operators. There's also the addition that was approved last week in the maintenance of effort requirement, and so that local jurisdictions would have to report on this based on their return to source funding. And then the third component is for any project over $10 million based on the project performance criteria, you would be reporting on that, how that project is benefiting communities of concern and low-income residents. So those are 3. So we kind of took this component and spread it into 3 categories for reporting for how our funding is benefiting community concerns and low-income residents. And that's that common theme that you saw in the social equity in terms of making that we're ensuring the TEP, consistent with this countywide transportation plan, is providing a proportional greater benefit for those communities concerned and low-income residents. So I want to mention that because the whole thing is kind of tied together, and that's how it got sprinkled through the entire TEP.
Recognize that we did take out the requirement that if you receive more, if all you receive is return to source funds, you have no reporting obligation. Then, in terms of changes from last week, on page 45 under complete streets, there used to be a sentence which we've now blacked out at the bottom, which said achieving this vision will require balancing the needs of different users and may require reallocating existing right-of-way for different uses. That's been deleted from the current version. Moving on to page 48, we also removed a sentence that I talked about some project assessments at $5 million. Every project assessment now begins at $10 million, whether it's one time or a series of related projects that hit that threshold. Then moving back to page 8, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the goals in paratransit. So this is a comment we received just in the past few days, and it's basically informational. Doesn't require us to do anything. It basically gives us and all the readers information. So we're recommending that be included. Then in page 27. In the description of accessible transportation for seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities, there's a request to add the words accessible and cost-effective in that category. which hopefully is something that the accessible transportation plan will help achieve. Anyway, and staying on that page, a request that the plan is developed in collaboration with stakeholders, transit and nonprofit service providers, so that we bring in more of the people who currently provide service in the county into the development of the plan. And then in terms of revisions to the guiding principles, I think these were a combination of things that you approved at the last meeting and some other comments. We've changed the relief traffic congestion by, just expanded it by indicating we reduce travel times, but also moving more people with fewer cars as an example. The economic opportunity, we want to promote job growth that is close to residents' homes or high-frequency public transit. I think most of us have general plans to do that. We want to improve access for opportunities for low-income populations and communities of concern, which is the same thought we've talked before, and we just inserted the word funds in the performance orientation as opposed to the word, well, as opposed to no word. More on that page, under commitment to technology, is just make it clear that we want to incorporate advanced technologies and emerging innovations to pursue the goals of the TEP, and accountability and transparency. We changed "and" to "will." Thank you. So whoever said they knew this and was ready for the test.
I'm sorry, Don, I missed this. Can you repeat all this?
But for those of you who are not already, whose eyes are not already rolling. So we'd be happy to answer questions before you take public comment.
Okay, questions? By the way, thank you so much.
Thank him. I was largely, my involvement this past week was we left for Friday to go to the mountains. We came back this morning. Most of the conversations I've had on this have been, using my wife's hotspot to download his things and talking to Tim while sitting out on the deck. So Tim and other staff really did the vast majority of the work.
Well, I think both of you contributed quite heavily to this, and the way you've outlined this step by step is to be commended, because it was done right in a methodical and upfront way. So I'll start to my right, and Mr. Kevin Romack.
Okay. Revisions to Public Oversight Committee. As under the public, page 41, where we talk about the groups that we're going to include in this. I have a number of questions, so this is just the first one. Are there currently organizations that aren't part of the coalition that also should be considered in this process? I mean, right now, we're getting all of our input from the coalition, but are there other organizations who may have an interest in participating in the POC that are not being included here?
Well, so I think what we drafted was with the intent of allowing the authority to have a broad public solicitation for the members in these unnamed categories, or the named categories but unnamed recipients. We would solicit from the particular organizations their nominees, but if someone else applied, then my assumption is that the authority would interview all the applicants and make a recommendation.
Can I piggyback?
I'll cede to you.
Thank you, because I was going to save this for a comment, but that is my question. I thought I heard you say, Dawn, that, and I understand the various organizations, but I thought you said that Monument Impact would select the low income. Somebody said Monument Impact.
I think that was a feedback coming from, that wasn't.
That's a feedback, not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, because
Right.
there are many more organizations out there. All right, thank you,
Right.
Kevin.
Thank you. If I could stay on the same, that clears up a lot for me, too. I think it's extremely important that we set a respectable period to put out applications for people that want to apply to this. And my question is, can we make the transit, or will you consider the transit component of the 4 being from our ex officio? and we keep our ex officio and have them report back to us.
I'd ask our attorney whether there's any conflicts with any other resolutions we have. So the ex officio rotates among the 4 transit providers as opposed to anybody else who might be involved in transit. Yeah. But just to clarify the language that we're recommending, it's on the bottom of this slide. It said the authority will consult with interest groups to solicit, identify nominees, and nominate POC members that represent those areas listed above. So it didn't say, while we might consult with Monument Impact and a bunch of others, it didn't say Monument Impact gets to name the person.
They do not.
They get to they can propose somebody.
Oh, yeah, but they do not get to name.
Right.
Thank you.
We made it very clear up above that said the authority, POC members shall be selected by the authority. So we're trying to cover this.
Okay, Kevin, you still want the
Yeah,
floor?
I'm still on here. Under Public Oversight Committee, paragraph 5.1, following modifications, the authority will provide resources for meeting design and process facilitation, skill and knowledge building in order to foster and support the POC's ability to provide meaningful input and recommendations. I'm concerned about that particular sentence, that perhaps we're trying to shape a monolithic board out there that is always in agreement amongst themselves and may not have the robust discussion that we would like to see happen at this level amongst themselves. And if, like I say, I'm concerned with creating an organization or a body that totally agrees with themselves on everything, and there isn't the dialogue needed to actually exercise and ferret out the best solution.
So there's no intent in this language to make them all lockstep. There is an intent to bring them up to a shared level of experience and knowledge about the issues that they're going to be dealing with.
Good, I totally agree with that. The education part, maybe not the first part, it's just the ending the way it is, that kind of fostered that concern.
Okay.
And then lastly, has to do with the compensation. The concern is, right now, we're not going to compensate anybody unless they low-income low-income members. So that's telling me that we're not going to compensate you unless somehow that you can prove that you need the money, to be blunt about it. Are we expecting to have some sort of income test here that not only as you apply, that you also have to provide your income to, so we can make some sort of judgment on whether you need assistance or not?
Right. So it's a fair question. I think the first request we got was that it was a request for reimbursement and travel and incidental expenses for the low-income members, and we said that we didn't want to go down that path of giving it to some and not to others for the same reasons you mentioned. Now, we did propose it here because we felt that the authority might not want to get into this issue of providing other kinds of assistance to all members.
Right. Well, I mean,
but it is said that so we could say that exceptions may be made by the authority to reasonably assist members to participate in POC meetings.
But that is what. That's to me, that's a very broad statement. Could mean anything we want to. We give them a ride.
Well, they're already getting that.
They're already getting that, but
It's for like a low-income person who may have to not work that day. And, I'll wait for comments.
Yeah, we'll wait for comments. Okay. Anyway.
Okay.
Noted.
Mine's a
Right,
question.
noted, right? Okay.
Does
Okay.
this new oversight committee still replace the current advisory?
Yes, this would still replace.
And we do have some history of how we treated people in the advisory committee that we could use.
Well, we've certainly, I think other staff members can talk more about that, but we've certainly provided them with staff support. I'm not sure they get compensated for expenses, travel they do, so this would be the same. They don't get reimbursed for showing up at meetings.
Either did you.
Neither do I. But that was by choice in my case.
Okay. All right, now, I'm going to start over there. We'll start far left, moving right along, moving right along. Boy, you got to Newell fast.
Thanks. We'll start on this one. Maybe just a question for attorney. As an employer, I don't think you can break out a class like that. If we do across the board, it has to be across the board. I think most state labor laws and everything. I don't think you could. Is that
All right.
true? Would be in my company. I couldn't single out a class even if I want to.
I do think it would make sense to delete the low-income communities, and if you'd like to keep it in, just make it to reasonably
To
assist.
assist, to overcome barriers.
Right.
Yeah.
Or to participate, I think we were going to delete the overcome, to reasonably
Okay.
assist to participate in the POC meetings.
Okay.
But that could be part of the comment discussion as well.
Would it make sense, Dawn, and I know you've all been working, as Chair Bob said, to really get this done, on where we use, and I think this is just wordsmithing, this is page 13 of our outline. This is on page 3. It's the first place we use, and this is the inserted sentence, CCTA will commit that the TP will deliver proportionally greater benefits to communities concerned. The words proportionally greater benefits were used in different ways in different places. If we could use that same phrase
Okay.
to be consistent, and we sometimes use the word ensure with EN, and then assure, would
Right.
it make sense that those all,
We'll look. at
that one, this is where it starts. Since
Okay.
that shows up at the beginning of the document, let's be consistently clear all the way through if that's appropriate. I don't have any other questions. I have comments, and I'll wait until afterwards. Thank you.
Julie?
Well, I will piggyback on that just a little bit. Still looking at the Public Oversight Committee membership, I'm going to make an assumption, but I don't know the answer, and Mala may have to answer this. Are these members all Form 700 folks?
Are they all what?
Form 700?
FPPC.
Yes, they would be.
Okay. So-
Could I just add, would we then not need to be fair to put that in there? Because they have to report, our current committee does. Wouldn't it be appropriate that we put that anybody serving on that?
I mean, typically, those things like that would go into the bylaws for the committee, and you would know it when you
Okay.
apply. We could put it in
That's
this if you
fine.
But let's
wish.
be transparent, so we don't want
Right.
somebody to get appointed and say, I can't comply.
Right. And my other
Form
question,
700 FPPC.
I just forgot. I'll think
Okay.
of it later.
All right, I see no other lights on. So at this time, we can move into public comments. Am I correct?
As far as we're concerned, yes.
Okay, now then, to the public, and we have a tremendous amount of cards. So in the, you know, I want everybody to speak. I do not want to cut the 3 minutes down, but if you could say what you have to say and say it in less than 3 minutes, but that would be okay. But
Ditto is also acceptable here, too. If you're following someone who's already said what you said, ditto will work for us, too, yeah.
okay. All right, so if you use the word ditto, I guess ditto it is. All right. What is kind of interesting about this, they are in no order, just however I received them. So I'll name a person, then we'll put a person in the queue. First person, Jamie Gonzalez, followed by Bill Whitney. Well, that's kind of what I put one in the queue. Okay, it was,
He asked me to go first, so if that's all right with you, Mayor, I'm going to,
okay.
Bill Whitney with the Contra Costa Building Trades. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm here to speak in support of the local hire language that is in the document, as well as the apprenticeship language that is currently in the document. Many of you may or may not know that there's 35,000 building trades members that live in Contra Costa. And you know why they live there? Because they get paid well, and they have benefits that allow them to be in the middle class. So immediately, in that zone that you want with regards to local hire, because we have these people, those 35,000 men and women, they've all graduated from joint labor management apprenticeship programs, all of them. And they've learned the skills to be world-class technicians and engineers and hands out there working on these job sites. 97 to 98% of apprentices that have graduated in this county have graduated from the Building Trades Council. An enormous number, and we continue to keep those numbers. Our graduation rates are extremely high in our apprenticeship programs. All joint labor management apprenticeship programs are ERISA trust funds. So what that means is that the men and women in the building trades voluntarily take money off their paycheck. They put it into a trust fund that is managed by labor and management, and the Department of Labor oversees us. And all of the members of the apprenticeship, say, JACs, are fiduciaries, and they are committed to making sure that all of the apprentices are benefiting. So the money goes to the beneficiaries, which are the apprentices, period, end of discussion. This is a collaborative process, and it's a combination of labor and environment and elected officials and business and many, many others. And we definitely want to be part of that, and we're in support of this adventure that we're going to be going on here in the next, hopefully, few weeks. If that language changes, I can't look you in the eye and tell you how we're going to get there with the building trades. I just want to be frank with you that I have a lot of crafts that I have to deal with, and they're like independent city-states. And if they decide that they're not happy with these changes, and they will be, a number of them will go off in different directions, and you'll have a fractured support at best. So I urge you that you stay with the language that has been proved by your attorneys, that I believe the staff supports, that the committee members that I'm on with support, and together I think we can get boots on the ground, do the phone banking, do all the things that are necessary to make sure that this gets approved. And I just used up my 3 minutes.
Yes, sir, you did.
Thank you very much.
Now,
Chair.
And I would just remind the authority that you have 2 letters, one from Transpac and one from, actually 3, one from the coalition dated August 14th, and then one from Save Mount Diablo that we received this afternoon.
Mr. Chair, I just want to ask a question of Bill, just to be clear, if that's okay.
Sure.
Bill, I want to be perfectly clear. First of all, thank you for being here. One, your request is right now, and your support is for the language that's in our proposed
The language that we
TEP
have now
that's
that
proposed.
deals with local hire
Right.
and
No, I just want
labor
to
management.
I want to be clear, because it was a long, you support what's in there. Forget about the no changes. You support what's there. And also, by the way, isn't that the same language we have in Measure J?
Not sure.
It's similar.
Yeah, it's almost
Very
identical.
similar.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I think
Right.
it is. That's why we have it in there. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Jamie, we'll try to get you up here again. Followed by Jesse Polarez.
And for the record, it's Jaime Gonzalez. But I'm a business rep for the operating engineers, and I'm just going to go ditto with what Bill just said, because he pretty much covered everything.
Thank you.
So, we'll support.
So, Jesse, and then Joe Lopez.
Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to speak here tonight. My name is Jesse Perales, and I am a field representative for the Carpenters Local 152 in Contra Costa County. And I am here in favor to speak in favor of the 2020 Transportation Expenditure Plan, especially where the CCTA requires apprentice labor enrolled in or graduated from joint labor management apprenticeship programs on construction projects estimated to cost $1 million or greater. I represent thousands of carpenters that live here in Contra Costa County, plus hundreds more that live in the surrounding 8 counties. We look forward to a productive partnership and help put our members to work. I'd like to thank you for your consideration and time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Joe. Followed by Glenn, I can't quite read it. Glenn Linnell. I'll try that one. Joe, you're up.
Oh, hi. I am Joe Lubis. I'm with Associated Builders and Contractors, Northern California chapter. ABC NorCal is a construction trade association of nearly 500 general and subcontractor members who perform commercial, industrial, and public works construction. Many of our contractor members are located here in Contra Costa County and the Greater Bay Area and have performed work for this authority here. ABC NorCal is approved by the Department of Industrial Relations, Division of Apprentice Standards, and also in 5 apprenticeship programs: carpentry, construction craft labor, electrical, painting, and plumbing. We recently became aware of the proposed language in the TEP plan that inadvertently fails to provide equal opportunities for all apprentices enrolled in state of California approved apprenticeship training programs. As a result, some contractors who have been certified by these programs could potentially be excluded from performing work for the district, and everybody who has chosen to enter into unilateral apprenticeship programs in pursuit of a construction career are excluded from the opportunity to work and gain invaluable on-the-job training experience that provides stability for them, their families, and their community. We understand this might be an oversight of the board, and we encourage a review of the proposed language to ensure that all apprentices that are enrolled in the state-approved programs, unilateral and joint, have the opportunity to work on the projects in the communities in which they work. In Section 21, local contracting and good jobs should be amended to read that apprentices enrolled in all programs have the ability to work on construction projects estimated to cost $1 million or greater. Please remove the word joint.
Thank you, sir. And I'm sorry if I couldn't read that last word, Gwen. Followed by Lisa Ornward.
Yes, Glenn Lovell of Ironworkers Union Local 378. Just speaking in brief, of course, ditto, if you will, on Mr. Whitney's point. We believe that this existing language on apprenticeships and local hire does support development at its most equitable of making critical investments in public goods, while, of course, creating the pathways for enduring living wage jobs for more local residents, and the virtuous cycle that brings of these important investments and the robust revenues that it returns in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I call Lisa. Oh, hi, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hammond. I work for Choice in Aging. I just wanted to point out a couple of things and ask a question. I think you have a copy of some suggested language changes that we recommended, and I don't think, Don, on page 3 it included the sentence about, in particular, projects and programs that provide transportation in lieu of or in addition to Americans with Disabilities Act ADA paratransit service will be prioritized. So the second one was included. Then on page 27, under accessible transportation, et cetera, we added a sentence about these populations may also be unable to use ADA paratransit service due to, and there's a couple disabilities listed there. One was long trips due to medical conditions. The other one was a requirement for door-through-door transportation, because some paratransit users cannot actually go from the home to the paratransit bus or back into the home without supervision. So those were some other things that we had in the letter that I believe that you have before you, and I'd really like to see that those be included. We worked with a number of groups that advocacy groups that work with seniors and people with disabilities to come up with this language, and so I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
And I believe you have this. Thank you so much.
I think, I'll just we included some of it. We didn't include others because we felt it could be included in the accessible transportation plan when that's developed. But of course, it's the authority's choice.
Thank you.
Lisa, is it precluded?
I don't think there's anything in this that precludes the request.
Thank you.
So Lisa, followed by Lindy Lavender.
Good evening. You still can't pronounce my last name, Bob, after all these years. I'm surprised. I just have to give you a background.
You have 30 seconds.
Revenge, I get it. I'm Lisa Border-Brigham, and I'm here on behalf of the home building industry and the BIA of the Bay Area. And we were heavily involved in the Measure X in the last campaign, and we're pleased to support the revised TEP language. As you might imagine, we've been following the discussions about some of these language changes very closely. We do have one request that CCTA publicly commit to involving stakeholders at a very high level in the development of the VMT bank and exchange. As you all know, the entire state is grappling with how to implement the VMT and conversion from the level of service process and the mitigations. There are a lot of questions that have been raised about how that policy and how those guidelines are going to be done. Your VMT bank and exchange may well serve as a model and as an example used throughout the region when other jurisdictions take it up. And so we have a lot of concerns because when those come forward, it will apply to residential development projects and not just to transportation projects. So we have a lot of interest in making sure that that gets done right because, of course, not only will it increase the costs for transportation projects, leaving less money for all the things that we want to get done, but it could also potentially increase the cost of housing, which we don't need to have any more increase in housing costs going on, as the Lord knows. So with that, thank you. And again, BIA is pleased to be on board and continue with the campaign once again, although I am suffering a little PTSD just being here in this room from all that stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindy?
And Mr. Chair, if I may note that one part of the recommendation was to include the VMT process as one of the guidelines under what's now Guideline 43. And you'll note that that would involve an extensive public outreach process and community engagement. So hopefully that would address Ms. Border-Bruggen's concerns.
Lindy, followed by Ryan Lau.
I'm Lindy Lavender here on behalf of the East Bay Leadership Council. The EBLC would like to thank the board, CCTA staff, and especially Don and Tim for all of their engagement. We really were glad to be part of this process. We believe that this TEP considers the economy, the environment, and the importance of equity within our community. We recognize this as an opportunity for transformative action and are optimistic that this will help to relieve some serious congestion issues that we have, but also to aid in mode shift, and we're glad to see that. Our board hasn't actually had the opportunity to endorse this yet, but we anticipate being very supportive, and we really thank you for all of your work and effort here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan, followed by Marty.
Evening, Commissioners. My name is Ryan Lau, External Affairs Representative from AC Transit, and for once I'm not asking for anything. Wanted to thank the authority for making transit a priority in this measure and for staff being so receptive to the concerns of transit operators and working collaboratively through this process. We've come a long way since Measure X, and there's been a great deal of progress made through this process of the TEP creation. We look forward to working with the authority on the integrated transit plan and alleviating the congestion that commuters endure on a daily basis. So thank you.
Thank you. Marty, followed by Ann Ching.
Good evening, everyone. I am Marty Roach. I live in Moraga. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of 7 of the groups that signed on to the coalition letter. And first of all, I just want to thank everyone, the staff and the board, for all your hard work in the many wranglings of this TEP process. The TEP drafted, the last version that I reviewed and that was reviewed by the groups has a lot of really positive and important things in it that matter to these groups. And it required a lot of compromise on all parts, so I think that's a sign of something working. But it also means that there are these issues on the table, and I think we've set out processes to resolve a lot of them. But it also means that moving forward, the trust and goodwill, I'm hoping that we're going to continue to build on that because we have every intent to look forward to building greater trust and goodwill in working on this. One area that engendered positive support among the 7 groups, which I'm going to mention in a minute, was the VMT and greenhouse gas reductions, the different language we put in around that, and particularly the mitigation program. It isn't worked out. There's issues. Lisa just mentioned some of them. But it is really an innovation, and Contra Costa would be the first, I think. So it is important, but it's also leadership, and that's really exciting for our county to have something like that. As the TEP is worded, I've received strong positive response by the leaders of 7 organizations that I work with directly. 350 I work with directly. Also through the Contra Costa Climate Action Network, which I convene. These organizations are 350 Bay Area, Sustainable Rossmore, Contra Costa Citizens Climate Lobby, Elders Climate Action NorCal, Sunflower Alliance, Indivisible Resisters Walnut Creek, Contra Costa Move On, and the Orinda Progressive Action Alliance. All of these organizations lead people are ready to recommend endorsement to their organizations with the current plan that we have right now, and I feel optimistic that these endorsements will be forthcoming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ann, followed by Dave Surrey.
Good evening, Board. Ann Chang. I'm wearing my hat as Interim Co-Executive Director at Transform. So just want to say thank you so much for all the hard work you all have done to the staff. Incredible amount of work. We are so grateful to have your leadership and to be working so collaboratively with you as well as the members of the coalition. Some of you might know, I grew up in El Cerrito, partly as well as in San Ramon. I actually started my career at Contra Costa County with my colleague over there, John Cunningham, and so proud to have us, leading not only now, but actually back, when we did the first TOD in the region. So building on that success, I want to see just all of this come to light. Having been the mayor of El Cerrito, I just want to personally thank all of you, multi-time mayors, probably over hundreds of years of experience in all the meetings that you've gone to look out for your cities, the region, and the county. Specifically, I'd say Transform is very excited about many elements of this plan. It represents a shift and substantially improvements towards transit. It advances climate and equity goals for making Contra Costa a leader in the region. It includes incentives for anti-displacement measures, which is also a first, in addition to the VMT mitigation program. It'll, keep adding biking and walking paths, reversing commutes, and we just can't wait to work with you to support the plan as it is and join on this journey with you to lead the region. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Dave, followed by Haley.
Yeah, I want to take this time to thank everyone on the authority for letting us be here and be part of this exceptional coalition. So ditto to a lot of the things that Ann said, but I want to say just as a resident of Richmond and a Contra Costa County local and a regular bike, bus, BART, and occasional ferry commuter, this is definitely an important step for increasing access and promoting connected, walkable, and very resilient communities. This plan will create more opportunities to bring transit options right to the front door of residents, and kind of locally for me, it will continue to reduce congestions in West County, where public health concerns related to greenhouse gas emissions are already quite significant. And it's definitely excited about the incentives for anti-displacement measures, and I'm glad that this is really kind of a first. So the addition to also include social equity as part of the TEP really speaks volumes about the intentions and the outcomes of this proposal. So we are definitely excited to continue to collaborate and work together and see where we go to get this passed. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Haley, followed by Dave Campbell.
Good evening. My name is Haley Courier, East Bay Regional Representative with Greenbelt Alliance. I am incredibly grateful to the work of the CCTA staff throughout this entire project and for the support of our board members. They've done an incredible job working with us in our coalition of environmental and equity stakeholders to help you improve the impact of this measure. I am excited and pleased with the progress made on the TEP. With the inclusion of all of the elements described by staff tonight, as a package, I am prepared to recommend a position of endorsement to the Greenbelt Alliance Board. My colleagues Cheryl Brown at the Save the Bay and Deborah Bellinger at Monument Impact are prepared to recommend support as well. Given the late hour of these final edits, I'm only able to support the language as it stands. I'll make any changes will make my recommendation much more challenging given the late hour. In addition, I look forward to seeing the more detailed results of the greenhouse gas and VMT analysis of the projects. I'm very excited that's part of the work. I'm so pleased with the strong greenhouse gas and VMT goals set by this plan. That is the direction we need to go in this county and in this country. And I look forward to building on the strong, or on the good work we've already done so far and ensuring these funds help us get there. I'm especially pleased with the development of a VMT mitigation program and the inclusion of community stabilization. As a note, I would be interested in more clarity regarding the selection of POC members, given some confusion between the printed TEP and what was on the slideshow. Again, I am, with the language as is, I am prepared to recommend a support position.
Thank you. Dave Campbell.
Dave Campbell, Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay, here to say that Bike East Bay is in full support of the plan before you tonight, and I will add enthusiastically in support. We have spent a lot of time, and the commitment this plan makes to bike ped funding is reason enough for Bike East Bay to support it. It's not enough that Bike East Bay would have supported it going forward. We support this because so many coalition members that we work with on important issues that you just got a summary of from your staff in terms of accountability, open and transparency, communities of concern, transit, VMT reduction, these things, it takes this coalition to make this successful. And so that's why Bike East Bay is in support. Yes, thank you for the 10% for bike ped funding. I know what you're thinking. Why isn't it 11%, Dave? I'm going to tell you in just a second. But it's got good bike ped money. I'm here to tell you it's got the best complete street policy in the East Bay. And every year the national group asks advocates, submit your best complete street policy, and let's see who wins. So this will be submitted, and we're going to see if it wins. We'll find out probably after the voters vote, but it'll still be fun to hear if we've got the best national. But we're certainly the best in the East Bay. You've strengthened the Public Oversight Committee. Thank you for that support. And transit, that's the big change from my perspective. You've been hearing me in all these meetings. I want real transit funding for what Contra Costa County needs. And we've got that with the 5-year extension. I know that's not an easy decision for everybody. But you're here hearing from a broad coalition to say, we're here to support that tough decision you're being asked to make. Hopefully it's not too tough. Since last Friday, sorry. Seems like it, yeah, right.
It does. It's been a long time.
Our coalition has been on the phone constantly, literally constantly for the last 5 days to get us to this point. So I'm delighted that we're here. It's like Haley said, it's not easy to massage this real time from the dais or from the podium. But it was a pleasure to get us here working with many stakeholders, working with staff endlessly as well. And it was a pleasure to be one of the agencies running a field office for the Measure X campaign last time. We ran a field office for the Measure BB campaign in Alameda County several years ago as well. And we're ready to talk to the stakeholders to do that again on March 3rd and pass this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Dolene, followed by Barry Barnes.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and particularly the board and authority. Tonight, I don't want this to fall, so I gotta make sure. And the staff here, Contra Costa. So I'm Darlene Jones, former bus driver, AC Transit, 21 years. And I'm a candidate for the AC Transit Board next year at large seat. And I'd like to thank people in advance for voting for me. And in the past elections. But from a bus driver perspective, this board has, fed me, and I was a taxpayer on 2 pieces of property in Contra Costa. But I'm starting to see all of this gentrification that's happening in West County in particularly, so all of this new housing that's coming. And I see the same problem with the 800 bus late at night. It doesn't seem to go past McDonald Avenue. The people from McDonald Avenue all the way up to Contra Costa County College, they're still cut off from the system. So I hope that this new TEP program will address that, and that AC Transit has enough money to expand the service, and particularly Richmond. And I also wanted to bring up the fact that, my mother lives in San Pablo. And she's very highly concerned that since the hospital, the old doctor's hospital, is now torn down, that everyone starts to think about the seniors that live along that corridor and how are they supposed to get around to their doctor's offices and appointments and to a hospital should something happen in Richmond once again. That's why I'm here tonight, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Barry, followed by my very last speaker card, Marjorie McQuee.
Thank you. I'm Barry Barnes with TBWB Strategies. I'm a political consultant that's been retained by an alliance that's been the very beginnings of coming together to start putting together the campaign coalition to pass this measure in March. And so I just wanted to say on behalf of the business and labor and civic leaders that have started working on it, that we're so much looking forward to working with the environmental and equity community. We've been working together over the last 4 or 5 days to get everybody where they are tonight. I think that the outpouring of support from all the different communities who've spoken tonight, both from the environmental and equity as well as from the business community, labor and others, really is a demonstration that this can be a supportive campaign. It can be a winning campaign. I didn't work on the last one, so I don't have the PTSD. So I have some energy and looking forward to working with all of you. And again, we say a lot of times that a winning campaign is not decided in the last month. A lot of times it's in the first month. And if the progress that's been made in recent days and weeks is any indicator, I think we all have a lot of reasons to be optimistic. So thank you all for all of your work, and especially the staff and all the stakeholders.
Thank you. Marjorie? You want to help with the mic on there?
Good evening. My name is Marjorie McQuee. As you can see, I rely on a wheelchair to get around. And I applaud the efforts of this authority, and I just wanted to raise a couple of things. First of all, I don't think we're including the stakeholders themselves when we're talking about the disabled people. If you talk about the paratransit or the senior center or whatever, you've left out a lot of people that are not necessarily touched by those types of agencies, and I would like to see more involvement of the stakeholders themselves being able to participate. Second of all, I don't think that the county has taken a hard look at its pedestrian right-of-way. As somebody who gets around a lot, I can tell you that the county is not up to ADA code on a lot of its public right-of-way. And we need to be looking at a universal design approach, not just for people on bicycles, not just for people that are walking, but for people that may be getting around town in power wheelchairs or in a manual wheelchair or on a scooter on their way home from BART, because that's faster than taking a car or a bus. And I think we need to be including that language, and I did not hear that tonight. Perhaps it's there, but I would like to encourage a universal design approach. Lastly, I think that there's some oversight that needs to be looked at for the fixed routes in the community, centrally in the county, because there's a lot of areas that are not touched by buses regularly, for example, Ignacio Valley or Bancroft. Thank you.
Thank you. That was my last speaker card. We went through them pretty fast. I should have done that originally as when we started, but I want to thank everybody for their comments. Now, is there anyone out there who, in their hearts, their souls, they have to say something? Okay, that was your last chance. Before we go to the board for discussion, I'd like to make a kind of a pretty good statement here. I want to thank everyone that spoke. I want to thank everyone for turning the atmosphere around. CCTA is a good organization. Everyone out there represents their organizations, and I want to make sure that we're known for transparency. We don't try to hide anything from anybody, but we do respect every organization out there that spoke. And I guarantee you, if you don't think this board didn't get ulcers this past week, we felt everybody else's agony and pain because we feel this is a very justified endeavor that we're on. And from the mayor's seat as in a city and in the chair of this wonderful organization, this will be the betterment for Contra Costa County. This as we put this together, will this be a unique plan? I really think so. We have had more organizations involved. We've had criticism. We've had outreach. We've had spoken. But now we all need to go out there as a group, if this passes through the board, and we need to sell this to our communities. This is a good thing. And the taxpayers, I guarantee you, will get their bang for their buck, because this organization will make sure it's done clean, efficient, and transparent. With that being said, I'll bring it for discussion to the board. That's a first.
Okay, let's go.
Well, okay. No.
I thought you were pointing over there. I agree with what Bob just said. But I think it's important to note that this agency, since dating back to the 1980s, has been an agency that always was forward-thinking. It was an agency that was first in many areas in the environment, tying planning, housing, transportation, all of that together. Nobody else was doing that. Measure J did that to a higher level. We co-founded a autonomous vehicle agency that's looking at transportation systems and connectivity to find ways that are economical, they're good for the environment, they help create highway safety. You know, I worry about in this measure, we haven't mentioned safety. Safety. Well, part of our job and our mission is to create safe transportation, no matter what that is, whether it be a bus or a connected vehicle or a car. We can't lose sight of that because that's important. But when it comes to the environment, you know, it's important, and I like the tone that I'm hearing tonight, and appreciate all the work that's been done behind the scenes, and everybody's had a hand in that. We don't make deals with anybody. Everything that's in here and was in all of our other past measures is because we believe in it. This isn't about, I heard a conversation that disturbed me a little bit. Well, we're going to make them do this or we won't support it. Well, you know, please don't do that. Nobody's interested in that. First of all, as elected official, we can't do that. The things that we put in everything we act on is because we believe in it. We believe that our residents have a value and a value proposition in that. And that's important that we walk away feeling good about that. It's not because somebody told us we had to do it or that this is the deal. Because first of all, that's unethical to do it that way. But tonight what I hear is that we are partners in doing the right thing. This agency, some of us have the ability to travel around the world a lot, to look at transportation solutions, to look at ways of improving our environment. And we're one of those leading agencies in the world, by far in the United States. What we proposed, even going back to Measure X, this is a transformative process that looks at transporting people and living in work environments in a totally different way. And as an architect and environmental designer, this is exciting stuff, and we should celebrate that. But we have a challenge to us. 35 years wasn't polled. That's going to be a big lift to get this approved. So we might all feel good tonight, and we might think we have all the right things in here that's good for our environment, good for our families, good for our children, our grandchildren, that we have to be really careful that this will not pass because of us sitting in this room, because we all feel great, and walk out of here. That every single stakeholder that has a really vested interest cannot walk away and say, well, I got what I wanted, or I got what I think is important to we have to, as Dave Campbell said, we have to have every single person. And this will be harder. If we think Measure X was hard, and by the way, it failed, this is harder. And if you want to rate it, it's 50% harder than the last one because the economy is changing. California is leading the way in many areas, and we're getting beat up along the way. but this one is going to be harder. So if we are going to agree, we cannot walk out of this room and only see people who are sitting here over the past few weeks because of this process and they leave. You can't leave us. We can't do this by ourselves. We need each and every one of you. And that means not just sending an email. That means helping go door to door. We all do this. We have to do it personally on our own time. Our cities can't do that. All we can do is publicize factual information by law. So my ask and compliment, the compliment is thank you for being partners. Thank you for helping us create a shared value. Thank you for your support, I hope. But we need to make sure that you do help us. Otherwise, this is great exercise. And believe me, I've been longer than Julie, probably longer than anybody sitting here, getting things passed like this. This is going to be one of our toughest ones. But we can do it. We can do it if we all really work together. So I hope we can do that, and I appreciate it. My comments about some of the specifics, just a little wordsmithing that I asked earlier. On the committee, our oversight committee, I think we're there, but Lisa Wouterbruggen mentioned something, and I've shown this to a few folks that are not in this room who build. This scares them that they will never, ever be able to build a housing project again. Because while we think we have all this word about housings, there are many barriers in the way we talk about things in this new TEP that will create barriers. So we ought to make sure that that oversight committee has those people, because our job for the next 35 years with this in place, Contra Costa County's allocation for housing is going to be about 400,000 units. We did 250,000 over the last 18 years. So projecting forward the same population increase, we have to make sure that this doesn't stop that. Because otherwise the gentrification will get worse. The more houses we build, the less gentrification can happen until we get to that equilibrium point. So let's make sure that there's some representation, somebody like Lisa and that voice on there to help balance those, to make sure that the environment, our goals, and how to build and house our people in live-work environments so we don't have to drive. But again, I support where we're headed, and I think we're on the right road. Thank you.
Julie.
Yeah, I would just say ditto to everything Newell just said. And to take that last point just one step further, I'm wondering if, well, first a question. Anyone can self-nominate to be on the Public Oversight Committee, is that correct?
If that's the procedure the authority adopts, yes.
But they have to fill a category.
Well, I understand.
Yeah.
And so my next suggestion or question of the authority really was, because I heard loud and clear today from a couple of different organizations that wanted to be specifically named. I see we come into some issues if we start naming today specific organizations in some places and categories in another. And I'm wondering if it would be better to list broadly the categories, list who the appointments would be made by, the 4 by the RTPCs, the 1 by the Board of Supervisors, who are generally just members of the public with an interest in serving here. And then list broadly the categories that encompass the ones we have named, as well as the categories we've added, so that it doesn't feel like an appointment to a specific group is automatic, a specific organization. We have any number of groups that represent labor, for instance. We have any number of groups that represent bike ped or transit folks. I think, naming the Contra Costa Taxpayers Association, I understand that there are other organizations representing taxpayers. Most likely those would be the folks that today would be represented there, but I don't know 30 years from now. what organizations are going to be active and out there. So naming specific organizations today might preclude others. And I believe we had this conversation a couple of meetings ago. Groups like the League of Women Voters are a bit fractured in Contra Costa County right now. So it might be a category that needs to be described versus named. So I'd like some suggestions from staff and maybe some comments from my colleagues on that. I don't want to disenfranchise anyone specific here because, you know, the coalition members have been great to work with, but I have heard from some folks who were not part of that coalition per se, who have been great stakeholders in the past that probably ought to be on the Public Oversight Committee. You know, BIA folks and developer interests and some of the other folks that actually help make the engine run in Contra Costa. They're just as concerned about making sure that this measure passes, and I don't want them ignored. And that was why my question about, you know, being able to self-nominate and looking at how the interest groups are defined. So I think we need a little more work on that. And then I guess my other question is, and I know most of us have been polled on this by staff because we wanted to see whether we could actually get through this tonight and make a final decision on this tonight. And I would love nothing better than to do that. But I also think you threw a whole lot of changes at us in the last couple of hours were developed, and I'd really like to read the finished product front to back. Absolutely make sure I'm super comfortable. I think we're there. I really think I could vote yes tonight if I absolutely have to. But I think a lot of us would like to see the final language. So I'm just throwing that out to my colleagues as well. I really appreciate the work that's gone into this. I mean, Dawn and Tim in particular, but Lindsay and Hisham and Martin, they're burning it 24/7 right now to put this together for us. And a lot of us have been helping with that each in our own way. But I just am asking the question.
I'll start down there and work our way up. Hudson.
I'm sorry, you're working this way or you're going
Yes,
this way? Okay.
I'm working this way.
Let me see if I can get through a couple of quick things. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, but the real big one here is this is 35 years. I mean, I got the biggest no in the world when I brought up, maybe we should do 35 years or discuss it. And where I really got the no's, and I want to make sure we're on firm ground, was I looked at two supervisors that didn't look like they'd pass it. And you're going to need at least one of their votes. So we're okay with Karen, but I mean, all right, I mean, we could say this is a great idea, and if we don't get a 4/5 vote, okay. So we're good with not losing one. Page 5, the guidelines, number 43. You know, I wish this were something more like a minimum of 6 votes. We may have 9 people show up on, 10 as you have tonight. The 66 2/3%. So if 6 people show up and 4 vote for, I'm not sure exactly what they're going for here, and I'm not going to live or die on it. But I mean, if we do it all the time, fine. I disdain with the 2/3 stuff, but for 1 vote, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. And the third thing is, and the first 4 or 5 people that got up here spoke about one word in number 21. My biggest problem is not whether or not it's right or wrong. It's that we've got about umpteen pages of stuff to go through, and 21 isn't on there. And I just don't know if, unless somebody gets Aja to start speaking about this thing, whether we're going to address that tonight, because I see another. 21 was the joint training. It was labor that got up the first time. And I don't want to go on without not at least addressing that we did hear from them tonight. So those are the 3 things that caught my attention right away. And I'm actually fine with where we are right now. I think we're ready to go. I've read it and I can't find anything wrong, but I would like to have Don come back for one more meeting. So please come up with something.
Karen.
Thank you. I'm going to go through the presentation because I've marked some pages here. First off, I want to thank everybody. Y'all did a fabulous job. I'm not there yet, folks, and I'm going to tell you why, because I have concerns about the public. I've had a number of community meetings. I've been mentioning this, and as Newell said, this is not going to be easy to pass. And so as I make my remarks, again, it's not criticism of each of these stakeholders and their input, but as Julie said, there are a number of people who did not participate in this that, we have a coalition, but it's one coalition. There could have been a number of others. We engaged with this because they came to us. So I think it's important to mention that there are a number of people out there that still have concerns. So page 5, I don't have slide numbers, but it goes back to what Newell said earlier about revisions to the Public Oversight Committee. I think we have to make that general. We can't be saying who should be eligible for assistance relative to needs to be able to get to the community. It has to be broad. Everybody gets to ask, and we'll move on from there. And pardon me, I've lost a contact tonight, and so I'm really doing Mr. Magoo kind of things. No, it won't help.
No, the other eye.
Well, I've tried that. If you've been watching me tonight up here, I've got the dried out lens right here. I'm going to come back on to page 9 because that's the one that I have the most heartburn over. Page 13. Revisions to achieving intended outcomes, underachieving intended outcomes. I voiced my concern about this last week. I have real concerns that our cities will pass this language. This is, it's
13.
It's page 13, the bottom slide. We got 20 jurisdictions in this county, 19 cities in a county. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do this.
I apologize, Supervisor Mitchell. I'm having trouble figuring out what's
Page 13.
of the slide deck.
Yeah. Page 13. And then it says page 12 at the bottom of your.
Oh, page 12. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the August 23rd.
It's the CCTA will ensure funding in the TEP will achieve the outcomes, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
In evaluating detailed funding proposals, the authority will assure that expenditures benefit those living in communities of concern and for minority and low-income residents. We love the goal. We want to do it. I'm not sure. I just think I'm putting it out there. It's not, I'd love to hear what other people say, but how does this impact the return to source? And I just see city managers and city council, other city council people having concerns about this who have not been in this discussion. Maybe it just means we'll have to do more outreach. But as Tim and others go out to the various jurisdictions to get this passed, I can see that raising a red flag. And then on the next page, well, it's not the next page, it's page 15, the top slide, which is geographic and social equity. And I know that we have it in our, CTP, and I know you've tried to cover this, but it says CCTA will commit that the TEP will deliver proportionately greater benefits in communities of concern and low-income residents. Again, I'm concerned about our various cities when they see that, saying, how does this impact us? Again, I'm not saying it's not a good thing. We're trying to pass this. And as I said, I met with a community group the other night, and I was going over this, and that's not a big selling point to them. So back to page 9, which is the one that I have the most concerns about. And it's the top slide, communities of concern, page 30. Adding these 3 paragraphs. Okay, the first paragraph, that's RENA. I don't know why Julie's shaking her head no, so tell me if I'm wrong. But each jurisdiction shall demonstrate meaningful progress in preserving existing affordable units for low-income residents by adopting and implementing locally appropriate anti-displacement and affordable housing policies. I'm real concerned again about our cities. I bet a lot of them don't have that.
Karen, a lot of that's in our housing element as a requirement already.
Okay, that's good to know.
So it can be a checklist item.
Have it a checklist, because if you put this in paper and documents that are going out to the public and somebody chooses to read this, they're going to have real concerns. So
let me interject with you
Yes.
as a follow-up. My overall concern with a lot of this is it appears that we're putting a lot of work back on the cities that wasn't there before, and there are a number of communities out there that don't have the largest staffs, that don't have budgets that are overflowing. That may even be, on
the edge.
Definitely on the edge. And so the concern here is the more requirements we place on city staff to meet certain obligations, the more difficult it will be for us, even if it does get passed, for us to qualify for certain projects or whatever it is we're trying to do. So following along with Karen, and if a lot of this is already in our housing elements and whatnot, which I'm reading it, I'm sure it is, because that's part of the review of our housing elements every 7 years, where the state looks through us, or 8 years, and goes through our housing elements to make sure that we have these types of protections in there for low income, for affordable housing and whatnot. So a lot of this is already in place to make sure these are checklists instead of mandatory things that require staff time and staff work and dollars from cities.
But this will still be in the TEP. That's what my concern is, if somebody reads it. So if it's already in the housing, but then the next paragraph, I really have a problem with something that's already law. I just went through a major lawsuit with the county and a city in my jurisdiction over this thing. Our staffs know we have to comply with the Surplus Land Act. It seems to me we're putting a lot of stuff in here just to satisfy some person, some thing, some entity, because they don't trust us. And I am really offended by that. Yes.
I was just going to add, I would say it maybe a little differently. If we're going to have something like that in there, it needs to meet state law, right? We can't rewrite this, and maybe whoever suggested it didn't understand state law. We have to comply with state law. We ought to make a statement that all cities
we'll comply with all state law.
Yeah, right. But you could reference the act, what it is, so it's clear, so it lives in a visual way in everybody's mind. But it is dangerous to rewrite something because that's not accurate.
Maybe you just add in compliance with state law, but it still seems superfluous.
You could say what it's regarding. Right?
I know. I'm not going to live and die on it either, but my vote or my opinion is that is superfluous. And then the last one I think is where we're going to really have a problem with cities. Jurisdictions will provide a report on tenant protection and the production and preservation of affordable units. This is a huge concern in the city of Concord. You've read the paper. I understand the discussion. I think it's a good discussion to have. I do not believe this should be in the TEP. This, I think, cities and city council members are going to have a great deal of concern over, and we're not going to get the votes needed to bring it to the board to put it on the ballot. Just saying, folks, I could be totally wrong, and if I am, fine. But I'm not hearing this in my district, that this, and I'm seeing Luella over there shaking her head too. She's concerned. I know my Concord people are concerned. I don't know about Clayton. Pleasant Hill doesn't have a lot of housing to build, but I've got the most dense community district, and Concord is the largest city, and this is going to be a problem, folks, because our rules say that you've got to have the number of cities representing the number of people. So it's not just 17 out of 19 cities. It's X cities with representing X population. And this, I think, is going to be a big concern.
Can we ask staff what was the intent of this and how they figured we would comply with it?
So the intent was that we daylight these issues in the compliance checklist, and that we have jurisdictions develop a locally appropriate anti-displacement and affordable housing policies. I can assure you this is substantially different from the request we got.
I'm sorry?
This is substantially different from the request we originally
I understand
received.
that, Don, and I know you guys have done a lot of work. I still think it's problematic.
I think it could be. I think for example, in the Surplus Land Act, we had several years ago, unrelated to the TEP, the state passed the Complete Streets Act. And we said cities had to, could either go through this elaborate process or just incorporate complete streets into their general plan. Some did some did the other. The third item.
What does that have to do with the Surplus Land Act?
Well, I'm saying this is Surplus Land Act is also state law.
I know, but
so all we're saying is cities would adopt a resolution saying that they're complying, and cities also have to prepare a publicly available inventory of vacant land that they own.
We do that, but I'm telling you, putting a board order on saying we comply with current state law is offensive. I am just stating that as an elected official. That is offensive. We already do it. I understand, Don, you're trying to work, but Complete Streets and the Surplus Land Act are two very separate things. If you want to put something in there about each jurisdiction will comply with the Complete Streets Act, that's fine. But Surplus Land Act is very prescriptive. And so, but again, I'm making my comments based on what I've heard in my community and what I feel as an elected official over 15 years of service. And that last paragraph, I'm just saying I think that's going to cause, whether it's a checklist or not, they're going to see this part about and preservation of affordable units. There's a big argument just to get to just cause evictions, which I think is a preservation of affordable units issue, and they can't even get that. So I don't see, I see this as a problem, and I'll leave it at that. Oh, I'm sorry, I do have one more thing. Going back to the transit issue, Don, people, and I appreciated your answer relative.
Which page are you looking at?
It's not. Now, this is just the letter from Lisa Hammond came up in that letter.
Right.
And what I'm understanding is, you gave the answer that you incorporated some of the language and the rest of it will be taken care of in the transit accessibility plan. The question I'm getting is, and is this true, I guess, is they feel there's a resistance to putting it in there because it's been in past, it's been 30 years of policy and study. So why is the if we're going to put in the Surplus Land Act language, we ought to be putting in the language that really specifies. As you recall, I asked you that question, does it preclude it? And you said no. But as much as if we're going to put something in like that really doesn't need to be there, then I think we need to look at language that fully incorporates their recommendation, because they weren't part of the coalition and they were last time. And I would just ask you to consider that.
We can certainly do that. Well, I think we'd be happy to take direction from the authority at this stage.
Thank you. I'm sorry? It's the letter that Lisa referenced. We don't have it unless it's in this big pack. It's in the handout packet. Relative, there's, I guess, certain language that got included and other language that did not.
Right. As far as the 35-year, we had a rather robust discussion at Transplan regarding 35 years, especially when it came to return to source amounts, and we were trying to work out a deal at Transplan. It was pretty much voted in favor at the Transplan level. Yeah, why don't we just go 35 years and we could just end the discussion? So I think at the Transplan level, as far as the Far East communities, that at the city level they would support the 35 years without much more discussion on that. And following up once again on Julie and the makeup of the POC, like I said earlier tonight, I agree totally with her that we shouldn't be singling out specific groups that we will automatically send invites to. As stated before, there's a number throughout the entire county that aren't participating actively in this, that may be on the sidelines, that may be talking with us individually, that aren't part of this process right now, that would love to be involved. And so maybe in our application process, we define what categories we're looking for, and the applicant decides, I'll be in this category, and I would love to be part of this board. The makeup could be, the size could be remain the same, but I'll follow up with Julie on that, that we really should be looking at categories as opposed to specific organizations that we're going to create an individual request for.
And just to follow up on what you just said, and that's exactly what I saw as I went through here, it's in attempting, you did a great job of it, attempting to cover everything, it leaves it not kind of tied together to exactly what communities of concern are. I mean, there's several different places here you say, well, in this group, the seniors will define whether the senior group is a community of concern, and going on to different organizations, and that's fine, but it's like there's different parameters for each organization to qualify depending on what type of organization it is that would be defined as a community of concern. I just think that needs to be tied down, but I think that can be done by the
Can I clarify
board.
for you? Because I know you weren't here last week. Communities of concern are as defined by ABAG and MTC.
No, I heard that.
Okay, they're not the seniors and disabled.
But that was said in another area.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And then what you mentioned, too, about the different parameters for housing. Okay, all those things somehow have to be tied together, and I think maybe that's what a oversight board can do, and there may be too many words in here to describe all that. That's what I'm saying. Maybe we've overdone it. And that's my only comment there. And the only other thing I want to say is, Newell, thank you for all the years that you have been involved in this. But I'm getting old and probably, I can't remember, I was on the board of Measure C, and I don't remember seeing you there, so I don't know.
I was a planning commissioner in those days.
What we're admitting that a lot of us up here are very old. So with
Long-serving, dear.
Yeah, I'm long-serving. I'm not old, by the way.
Okay.
Don't ignore this end of the table either. No.
All right. Here we go.
No. Oh, the well. I'm sorry.
Since I was quoted by a head nod, I figure I better say something of my own. So one of my congratulations, everybody. This is an amazing process. It's the first time I've been part of the sausage making operation, and amazingly, it works. The thing that I appreciate most about this, especially since we're looking at going out 35 years, is that there is a measure of flexibility, because I can barely predict what's going to happen on September 13th of 2019. My ability to have any kind of prediction for 35 years post-passage of this bill, fingers crossed, is non-existent. We're guessing at best. And so it is imperative that there be the ability to adjust to the changes and to adapt as many things as we can. If nothing else, that may be the most transformative part of this whole operation. On the Oversight Committee, I agree. We should go by defining some broad sense of what the appropriate balance is in the community, because we're all used to, our city, certainly in Walnut Creek, is used to everybody getting really old. And somebody was complaining about maybe people aren't going to the theater because the old folks are dying out. And I pointed out that there is a whole new wave of old people coming through who are middle-aged and younger, so that we need to be respectful of that, but their needs aren't necessarily going to be what our needs are right now. So we need to be able to, in the Oversight Committee, adjust to changing demographics, changing concerns of the community, and things and issues that are going to change. One of the things that I have struggled with this particular system is that sometimes the goals that we have as outlined actually get in the way of other goals. For example, one of the things I could think of was we have bridges that desperately need to be repaired, or you're going to be really sorry you're in the car underneath it when it collapses during the earthquake. We have those kinds of responsibilities that this is going to address as well, and that doesn't have anything to do with greenhouse gases or vehicle miles traveled. There are also circumstances when, if we have an opportunity to develop job centers in this area that don't now exist, I think by definition we will have to build ways to get to those job centers, and it will, I think, for a certain amount of time, increase vehicle miles traveled, because it takes time for the transit communities and people to rethink how they get there. So sometimes what we want to accomplish can't be accomplished with every single project, and we're going to have to figure out how you prioritize it when we're trying to apply to this. I am particularly concerned about when we get into areas that are beyond transportation. I'm going to use probably an emotionally toned phrase, which is probably the wrong phrase to use, but it's the only one I can think of. I really, really, really feel responsible for communities of concern, and I have for my entire life, through my volunteerism, through my community service, through a whole lot of times, have said, and made donations and put in energy and focused on trying to make good in places that are not well, not well at all. But I am concerned when we cross over into repeating other laws and making people affirm that. It gives the authority the ability to be an additional enforcer of those laws, and that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Quoting things and saying, well, we're going to agree to, we as the authority are going to agree to comply with it, but to act as an auditor for another entity, a city, just makes no sense to me at all. It's assuming a responsibility that we shouldn't have. So I really think we need to word those phrases carefully. I support that we do, and I'm comfortable that we say we do, but to pull them out by specificity. I don't think we have any rights to get into, unless one of our projects directly affects a particular area that causes people to be displaced. I don't think we have the authority to make individual cities and communities definitions about what they do. So my conclusion is that with a lot of hemming and hawing, I could probably justify voting this through, because I certainly do not want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is if you draw a line and you say it has to be exactly what I want it to be right now, we would undo such good for this community. But at the same time, recognize there are some things in here that I think could be better.
Mr. Chair, I have a question on process, if I could. And I don't know if this is Mr. Iwasaki or to Mala. We still have work to do. We're probably going to meet next week, but let's make the assumption that we pass on the TEP to go out to the cities. And it includes the language that Luella and I are mentioning and some others. Just assume it's in there. If it goes out to the cities, do they have to adopt it in whole, or can they then respond back, we like 9 of the 10 items, no. You're shaking your head, no. It's all or nothing.
I mean, if we had more time, then you could go.
Because we don't have the time for them to come back and us to rediscuss it. And we can't send 2 TEPs, TEP number 1 and TEP number 2.
The problem will be is you need the majority of the cities with the majority of the population to approve.
No, but where I'm going with that is if TEP 1 had everything in it and TEP 2 didn't have some of these social equity issues in it, and they could choose. It sounds like it's way more. I'm just saying that is where I'm coming from in my concerns. So thank you for allowing me to ask that question.
Yes. I'm sorry. I tried. A couple of things. One on the League of Women Voters. I am a member of the League of Women Voters, and I know that the two groups are fractioned. And so if we just said such as the League of Women Voters or something like that, maybe, yeah, or just,
no, we agree. We're going to take it out.
Yeah, that it would be a good idea, perhaps. And then the other one I had, on people with disabilities, the idea that they need to be supervised. I think it should say supervised or assisted. Personally, I needed help getting home from a paratransit ride yesterday. I think it was yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. And I didn't need to be supervised. I just couldn't physically get through the door in a manual chair, and it's downright insulting to have the word be supervised. For some people it is supervised, but the whole concept of the independent living movement is independent, not supervised. So if we could just say or assisted, where it says supervised in that letter, if we were to include it, that wording.
You got that, Don?
Well, I don't recall the word supervised in the TEP, so I don't know if you're looking at.
I'm not sure that's the right word.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're looking at Ms. Hammond's letter.
I think it was in the letter. I was saying if we include that kind of wording, we need to say or assisted, because.
What we do have is wording that says, in terms of reimbursement, exceptions may be made by the authority to reasonably assist members to participate in POC meetings.
Different category, totally.
And Jen, I didn't mean that they'd take that whole letter and dump it in.
Right.
I trust Dawn and staff to
But you get what I'm saying. I'm just saying.
Yes. We'll be judicious.
Just because you need help doesn't mean you need to be supervised.
Got it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa?
So I just have 2 tiny things, and actually, since I'd already turned my light on, I think Supervisor Mitchoff had just said that we already decided this, but I agree with Julie Pierce about the clarifying the POC makeup and not having it be specific organizations, but have it more broadly defined. And I know, or I believe there is not code for this in this situation, but for schools, for citizen bond oversight committees, they are very broadly defined in the education code. They're business organizations, taxpayer organizations, senior organizations, and then a number of other ones that don't apply here, PTAs and parents. But I think that broad definition has precedent and works. The other piece is supporting the addition of the language that came forward from the seniors and persons with disabilities advocates, adding that language in if it can be. And I appreciated the answer and the dialogue with Supervisor Mitchoff about it doesn't exclude it, but if it can be added there, I think it does show more support intent for these kinds of things, and we've added a lot of other language that does that same thing. So it's on page 8. I know you know where it is. You've seen the letter, but the language that wasn't included is on page 8. and also on page 27. And I don't see where Commissioner Abelson, I don't see in what we're asking to be included that it does have that language about support. It actually discusses independent living. And then I will just reiterate and say ditto to all of the thanks and for all of the hard work for the staff, for all the stakeholders, and am supportive of the TEP as it is. Well, with those changes that we just discussed.
No, can you wrap it up?
Okay, if that's what I'm supposed to do.
Amy?
I think we are there. I think as much, I would be willing to vote on it tonight, but there are some tweaks to some of the language I talked about just to make sure we're grammatically, when we're referring to our community's concern, we use the exact same phrase every time. Otherwise, we'll have to. I would think it would behoove all of us and our stakeholders. We all need to see one clean document, and we need to see it before we have a meeting next Wednesday, right? Get that document, right? Are we not having a meeting next week? Okay, good, we are. Everybody agrees we're having a meeting, same time, same place. I think we just have that, get it circulated to all of us and our stakeholders, because there were little tweaks, even those little language things that need to be cleaned up. Particularly if it's for state law, we should be stating that cities shall comply with state laws. We reference what it is, but let's not do something that gets us out of it. If we do all of that, I think for our stakeholder groups, they will see the language with the tweaks, not the intention to change it fundamentally or anything, just to make sure it's grammatically correct, meets all of our state laws, give them all a little time to make sure it's okay. Because we only have one shot, and Karen said it, and so did Luella. We have one shot to give this out to cities, right? We're all sitting here in the room trying to craft this. We have to now get 20 other entities to agree, 19 cities and the county, and we don't have a chance to change it. So by getting that document, say by Friday if possible, and nobody call them, by the way, till after Friday. Okay, let's agree. Leave them alone. Let them do a really good job. Make sure it's grammatically correct and it meets all the intentions perfectly. Get it sent out. We can even go. I'd like to share it with my fellow council members. I've been telling them about this. I've told our management staff. We had a meeting about it today. I think we all need to see that. Our stakeholders need to do it. Let's do one last, and let's come in with the attitude, unless there's something really wrong, that this is what we want to send out. And we have enough support in our own constituencies to hit a home run with this. No, let's hit a grand slam with this. This is our last shot for 35 years. There is no second chance. There is no second opportunity. It expires. We will never have the right again to even propose. So if we don't get it right, let's remember, we don't have the legal authority after this March election. That's it.
Thank you. Amy, hold on, let's get
Let me
Amy.
just-
And
yeah.
Amy hopefully be our last speaker.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Never mind. Julie's last.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's comments. First of all, I want to really thank the members of the public and the advocacy community and the stakeholders that have spent hours, weeks, months on this, along with us, to come up with a plan that we can bring to the voters and be successful. We do have one chance, and it's very important that we pass. A lot of the comments that I've heard tonight from the board were the same comments we had when we talked about Measure J and including achieving the affordable housing goals in the compliance checklist. That language up there is exactly from Measure J with some additions. And I guess, I understand that we do have one crack at getting this out to the city, so we have to get it right. But I am concerned because I believe that the elements that are in here that talk about the environment, that talk about equity, that talk about us making the next step are extremely important to the community members that have been working with this organization to bring this measure together. There's no doubt it's forward thinking. Much of this the cities are already doing. And if they're not doing it today, they're going to do it on January 1st. It's the kind of embracing where we say these are values that are inherent in Contra Costa County. And I really believe that the access to senior transportation, the access to programs and services and resources for communities of concern, the tremendous emphasis on protecting the environment is what is going to be successful about this measure. It's interesting, last year there was a study that came out that said that Contra Costa County is the #1 county in the Bay Area for upward social mobility. And I think what that speaks to the fact that there is tremendous opportunity in our county, but transportation is up there along with education and nutrition and housing that are elements that are really critical elements. And so my concern is if we start picking away at particularly the equity and the environmental elements of this plan, that we really are risking our ability to be successful. Now, I recognize the cities are going to look at this. Again, as Don indicated, much of this is incorporated in the compliance checklist. We're sensitive to the fact that cities do not have a lot of staff. They currently do the compliance checklist. We've been doing it since the beginning of time, and it's very successful. We do keep adding elements to it. But I think it's one of the most important things that Contra Costa County does, and it's something that puts this measure heads and shoulders above other measures that don't have those kinds of checks. I think also this responds to the voters. So my concern is I think that if it's the pleasure of the board to send this back to check that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, that's one thing. But to start making significant changes to the elements that the speakers talked about tonight, I think really runs the risk of us not being successful. So I really think that it's important that we get that the communities get the sense of where this board is, because if we're prepared to do this, and I know the staff has worked very hard. As Don said, a lot of this language is a compromise. I recognize, for example, if we're going to incorporate new language, I think it does need to be vetted. And for example, we're entering into this, $200,000 study that we're doing right now on paratransit. And I think it's very important that this measure not preclude what's going to come out of that plan. So I think it's really important if we look at this language that we're not creating service silos. So I think that's very important to make sure that language, I concur with the goals, that the language should broaden the kinds of services that we can accommodate as our population changes. But I think it's important also that we have that language that's flexible. So I really think that it's certainly the pleasure of this board. But again, I can't emphasize how important it is to be able to build on the broad-based support that we heard at the beginning of this meeting. And that this board does need to be a lead. And I think that's why we've been successful in Contra Costa County. This board has led in terms of providing not only quality transportation investment, but also responsiveness to our community. So anyway, that's it.
Julie.
Thank you. And we were asked at the beginning of this process to do something that was transformational, not the same old thing. And we are absolutely doing that. I think what's really important here is for everyone to feel comfortable, and that's not just the people at the board, it's the people in the audience as well. The list of tweaks, because that's what most of these are that Don went through. It's page after page after page, and we were scrambling, flipping pages, trying to figure out which paragraph and after which period and before what are these changes going. And so it made some of the changes stand out more than they perhaps should. And so what I was saying earlier is I think And some people may feel that the board is being critical of this plan. I don't think that's the case at all. I think what you hear is a board who wants to understand how all these modifications, these tweaks, fit into the entire plan as a whole and make it the right plan. I think most of us agree this is absolutely the right plan, and we're getting closer and closer and closer every day. I think there has been a tremendous amount of work that's happened in the last week. Otherwise, we wouldn't be looking at an August 16th, 5-day-old plan that still has things that need to be changed, because people have been working really, really hard to get consensus and to make sure everyone in this process is heard and understood. Does that mean it's all laid out in a way that we've read every word and understand where all these tweaks go? No, it doesn't. I mean, staff knows, but I have not read this cover to cover with all the changes in there enough to feel comfortable that I am able to totally explain it to my city council and anybody else that asks me about it. I think these changes that have been suggested tonight are the right changes. I really think they are important to go in there. I think the comments that have been made tonight to make them even more clear are helpful. And I think getting the consistency of language about the proportion of dollars for communities of concern is important to have consistency there. It's important that we get the language on the Public Oversight Committee exactly the way we've talked about making it. I think this is one of the most transformative pieces of this entire plan, is having a standing, almost a standing committee as an oversight committee that will meet on a monthly basis and have a regular place on our agendas every single meeting, much like the Policy Advisory Committee does for MTC, so that every month they have the opportunity to speak to the concerns that have been raised in their meetings. And if there are concerns, they will bring them to us and highlight those. This is something we've never done before. Our Citizens Advisory Committee passes stuff along to primarily the Planning Committee. It comes on up to us, but we don't actually hear a report from them. That generally comes through staff. This is making a change, and I think that's a really good change. And making sure that we define what their resources are going to be and all of that, I think, is really, really important. I don't hear anyone here today trying to pick away at the equity items. What I hear is people trying to make consistent statements about them and making sure that they are included properly. I think we all want to just see the complete package all together, the integrated plan that serves all of our constituents. By reading that plan and blessing it, I would say, I bet we have consensus tonight that this is the right plan. But I think it would be irresponsible of us to not have a fait accompli, if you will, that we can then take to our home cities and anybody else and say, here we go. We got it all together. Instead of having to go back and say, oh, there's one more thing, there's one more thing. You know, we've identified a lot of good things here, and I think that's really important. So I'm prepared to support going forward, absolutely. I would be surprised if there's anyone on this board that does not want to go forward. I'd love to see shaking.
I feel like I have to go forward. I'll be honest with you, Julie. There are things in here that create problems. And I appreciate the work you have done and others have done, but it's a little irritating to be told that, I mean, the stuff that's been added is fine. There are still concerns. So, yeah, I'll go forward because I want to see what happens, but I'm not happy with a lot of the stuff that's in here. As we mentioned last week, we are not a housing community. We are a transportation community, and we can have references in there, but I still have grave concerns, as I mentioned earlier.
And I think that's what Newell was mentioning, is that if we can cite where it is state law and just reference that rather than building our own requirements.
I go back to that third paragraph. There's no state law on that, and I'm not sure it's in our housing plan. The jurisdictions will provide a report on tenant protection and the production and preservation of affordable units. That is new language.
There's a new state law that actually has that exact.
And which state law is that? Because I sit on ABAG and I haven't heard of it.
There are 200 bills out there, and one of them covers that. Here's a suggestion.
Has the governor signed it yet?
No, but
Okay, I just want to be real
nobody's
clear.
against it. There's, by the way, there was no mitigation programs that are actually completely done yet. But by the time this is done, we're going for
No, the mitigation is fine, Newell. I am just still objecting to that
I think,
language.
Well, and I think staff has heard those concerns.
That's
and I
fine.
think they can incorporate your concern by giving the proper references and where these things are included. And what is the city's already doing, what goes in the checklist, things like that, just to make sure that we don't have cities coming unglued by what they perceive as a whole lot more work when they're actually already being required, in many cases by HCD, to do some of this reporting.
I can't, you know what? I was on the ABAG committee in MTC. I can't remember the number right now because they've got it amended.
No, he said there were 200
There
bills.
are 200 bills out there, and I don't remember the
So
specific.
we'll find it.
But
We'll find it.
Here's a suggestion. What I think, Julia, is maybe a motion to direct staff to take what we've seen, put it into a final document, make sure it complies with state, have our attorney look at it, make sure there's nothing in there, it needs to be tweaked for that. Make sure the language we talked about is consistent on communities of concern. Make sure the grammar is correct. Now that if people don't call you for a few days, I think we could do that. And the realization, we have been in the housing business since we started this. We have tied, we're the only agency that did that. We tied housing back in Measure C. We strengthened it in Measure J. This does it again. Julie brought up a good point. When we read these individually, you go, I start to think, what are we doing? But when I start to read it better in context, under the whole section, it makes sense. It's under our general policies of stuff.
Right.
I think we're there. I think if we all get to see it, no red lines, no strikeouts, give us a final document, all those, let our stakeholders, all of us as board members, read it thoroughly from cover to cover. I think we're going to find this reads as a complete story with these cleanups.
Well, and then I would like, and I know this is a lot of extra work,
So that's my
but
motion.
I don't remember having this discussion at any time in the last year or two about, because housing is tied to growth management. We have always said that. But we have not put the word affordable in front of it, and we have not put
Yes, we have.
that all of it had to be tied to affordable housing. That isn't what, so if you could give me documents
We have
to look at that.
HCD compliance, which is about affordable housing. We have HCD requirement in Measure J.
I still question that third
Okay.
paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that would be
Newell
the
just made a
motion out of
motion.
So if actually, before you make a motion, can I go through and just show you what I think the major changes you've requested are? And then you can correct us?
Don't know that there were major changes.
Well, the changes, I mean, they're all relatively minor. In fact, nobody changed the expenditure plan.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
so you go back to this slide, we're talking about the composition of the Public Oversight Committee, and what you're going to ask us to do is to replace each of the named organizations with a category, and we'll come up with a relevant category.
And you can use such as, or by example, names
Right.
of existing, but it doesn't preclude
Right.
another organization from filling
And
the
so
same
just
role.
to remembering that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, you're now telling Bike East Bay that they no longer have an assured seat on the Public Oversight Committee. You're telling the I understand.
It takes, this is, I hope Mikey Space here, but it's for
Right.
35
You're-
years.
you're telling the,
Such as all of those, perfect, representing those types of
Right.
constituencies.
So we'll make that change.
And there are other bike groups, and maybe
I
Bike East Bay
understand.
wants to do it, and the
Right.
next group wants to have a chance.
And then on this page, we'll make it clear that for all of these interest groups, We'll consult with the broad, we'll solicit applications from the public through interest groups. We'll identify nominees, and anybody can nominate a POC member, and the authority will make the selection. And moving ahead several pages, on this sentence, we're going to say that exceptions may be made by the authority to reasonably assist members participate in the POC meeting. So we're going to take out any reference to what kind of income they have, or and any kind of reference to barriers. All right. So I think knowing the conversations we have had, I think the most difficult task in front of us is to modify this page. I think the goal here is to, modify this page, which is the one that Commissioner Mitchoff has been commenting on. Obviously, the goal is to to identify the underlying state legislation that responds to each of these.
So we comply with that. That's just a written version of what we do.
So we just need to reference back. And I think the intent is to make all this part of the compliance checklist.
Because they could have already passed. I still don't understand why we need to do a resolution when we have to comply with state law. Can't it just say each jurisdiction? It's acknowledged that each jurisdiction complies with Surplus Land Act law and cite it?
Per state law.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go back to my board and say, we have to do a resolution, folks, saying something that we already do.
Commissioner Mitchoff, could we say as part of the checklist that each jurisdiction will affirm that it is complying with the Surplus Land Act?
That's great.
Okay.
Which means they could prove it by
Wherever
just
they do
submitting
it.
your document
Right.
that you've already done.
Yeah, so that takes out the resolution. It still requires that you comply, et cetera. All right. So anyway, so I think this is going to be our, still could be a challenge, because this is a page that we've had a lot of discussion on to try to hold a group together.
Sure.
So we just
You
got
want
one out of
another one
three now.
before you leave there, Don?
What?
I don't want to make light of what Karen is saying here. There is, to me, something that can be discussed at the next meeting that if we can get it out of the way between now and the next meeting will probably help, and that's that bottom line. Jurisdictions will provide a report on tenant protection, and then there's a second part to it, which I think can be explained away with legislation, preservation and protection of production of affordable units. But jurisdictions will report or provide a report on tenant protection. If you can give an example of what we're looking for there, or get whoever why this is important, why it has to be done.
We can do
because it's the staff. You know where I'm going with it.
Right. All right. So there's the general issue of consistency in language, and every time I read this, like, well, there's another word, there's another incomplete sentence, things like that. So there's a lot of grammar work to be done. And then I think the final comments were with regards to the letter we received from Lisa Hammond of incorporating appropriate portions of that in appropriate places in the document. So that's what we're going to focus on. And I would hope, and yeah, well, yes, I mean, that was part of the last comment.
And John, part of the motion was about cleaning up the language.
Yes.
Where we refer to communities of concern. Use the same phrase
Well,
every time.
that's what I was saying. We'll
okay.
clean that up.
You'll do all that. Thank you.
Then the other thing I would like to say is that staff has been extremely busy this past week. Them far more so than me. So I hope you would understand that any new comments or suggestions we get from the public, we will report to you, but we will not have time to incorporate or not incorporate. We will just provide them. So is that acceptable? I never believe that. I know. Right.
All right, but from the board.
I would second Newell's motion.
Well, I want to call for the vote, but how's this? I want to hear Newell, what he said. I want to. Karen, take it over. You got her. If you'd like to run it, you got it. All right.
Well said.
I would like, because we still have an audience out there, and we, okay.
Just to restate it briefly, thank you, Chair Taylor, and you're doing a great job. Thank you, my friend. that to direct staff to go back to make the minor edits we're talking to clean up for state law compliance, and where state law applies, state our HCD compliance, which says several of these that we already do. To state that, clean up the language and make sure nothing in here violates state law as you've described on the compensation issue, things like that.
I have a first.
That was the second.
I have a second. Is there any more discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. You got it done?
Thank you.
We have
guys.
it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We have,
Next Wednesday.
it sounds like we have
Want me to
another-
bring the champagne for next time?
But we still have another item to go over, by the way. Two
All
more
right,
items.
we still have two more items. 2.3, adopt ordinance 1901, conditionally amend the growth management program, which includes attachment, principles of agreement.
Wait.
I am.
Give him a couple of seconds.
Give him a second.
I'm just reading. Nobody's listening.
I know, but we can't hear you yet.
Ain't nobody gonna listen. Who cares? You're reading it. Oh my
The
God.
next two items will be fairly quick.
Okay, we're gonna continue our meeting, so if you got discussion, can you go outside so we can continue our meeting? All right. 2.3, who's doing it?
Move approval.
My question is, I thought we did this last week, so what's different?
So the next item in front of you is the revision to the ordinance 1901 to basically replace the growth management program and urban limit line that's set forth in the 2020 Transportation Expenditure Plan to conditionally approve this ordinance to replace that as such in the current Measure J expenditure plan and policies for growth management plan and urban limit line. Last week, we brought that forward for input. This week, we're bringing it towards you for actual approval. You do have a handout in front of you. Based on your previous discussion on item 2.1, we did update that ordinance to reflect the 30 to 35 year. So that extends everything from July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2055. And so those are the only two updates you'll find in that ordinance. So with that, that completes my staff report. Have to answer any questions.
Move approval.
Hold on, I do have some speakers.
Okay.
Also, I see 2050, still
So-
not 2055, on page 23-3, or the staff report doesn't work anymore?
It's in the
It's a new one?
handout.
Okay,
It's in the handout packet.
I'll get one of these
I do have.
tree-killing.
I do have two speaker cards, Larry Proctor and Fernando. Have the speakers gone?
Oh, it was heads up.
Okay.
No, I understand. It was a good piece of information.
Larry Proctor
Oh.
and Fernando Kyrex. All right. Wait, yes,
So one item, before I just thought about this, the previous item you were actually talking about specific edits to the growth management plan relative to the text that's actually on the screen right now in terms of housing and adopting a displacement and affordable housing policy. So I actually am now recommending we just table this item to next week.
all right, so we're tabling 2.3. We move into 2.4.
Well, wait, table that too.
And that item, I'm proposing to table that as well to next
Well, we
week.
just tabled that. Correspondence, communication, adjournment to a proposed meeting on Wednesday, September. No, when is it? It's going to be next week, whatever the date is.
August 28th,
Yep, at 6:15 PM.
6 PM.
You want it at 6?
Yeah, 6.
It says 6:15,
I know,
but,
but there's no meeting before.
okay. Okay, whenever Julie wants it, she can have it. So moved. All in favor? Opposed? Done. six